Look at all these people. People flooding in. Oh, shoot. Where is his introduction? Wait, can't see it. There, now you can see it. Admit.
It's definitely a wine day.
It's a blue buck day for me, mostly because I'm out of wine. Whew.
Wow, quiet.
It is quiet. Everybody's thinking hard.
Everybody had a good week?
No.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Do you want to be a field technician and install alarm systems?
No, I do not actually.
Okay, fair enough. If you know anybody who does, let me know.
No, I don't. I am quite happy with what I do for a living.
We're down 14 guys from where we were this time last year, and the work is backlogged, and people want to buy stuff. And I have to tell them, yeah, I'd love to sell you that thing, but you're not going to get it installed till February. So.
What a coincidence.
You're doing the same thing?
Pretty much. Yep.
Yep.
Hey man, how's it going?
Hey, audio's working.
Yeah, I switched from my computer. This fucking thing doesn't work, so I just switched to my phone. I can just, hear it.
Hey, Bryn, this is recorded. Watch the language.
What's that?
This is being recorded. Watch the language.
Oh, okay. This really nice thing is really, really not working. Really appreciate it. Better?
I will note this. Remember to take that out.
Are you saying we need some kind of baronial swear jar for these? I think
I don't have that much money.
I'll just send you a check now and get it over with, because that's. So I did some research into that armored steel fighting thing that we talked about last week.
Yeah.
And apparently there are a set of rules that are fairly different from Battle of Nations. Still not doing it. I do too many things. I spend way too much money on sword fighting as it is. I do not need to buy a full suit of armor to go with it.
What's the differences between it and the Battle of Nations?
This one is a counted blow system.
Okay.
So it's more like the one-on-one battles than it is the big field battles. In that generally they just count.
It's not just rugby.
Yeah, it's not demolition derby and armor.
Yeah.
The only problem I have is I've seen a lot of the Battle of Nations one-on-one, and how they count blows is really kind of weird and unusual. I don't quite understand their score system. My score that I calculate and their score is never the same.
Yeah, I don't really enjoy the Battle of Nations stuff. It's just like, even the one-on-one stuff, it's just basically an endurance test. You like get in a pell post. and I just don't find it that enjoyable.
Have you seen the really big Battle of Nations war they did?
No. I mean, well, just the stuff that they post online occasionally.
Not the 21 against 21. It was like 70 someone against 70 someone. It was like 3 teams against 3 teams on the field at once.
I mean, cool, but
it was interesting.
Well, yeah, I know that'd be kind of cool to watch, but yeah. But I mean, again, it's just rugby, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
Everybody goes quiet.
Everybody goes quiet.
Yeah, I like your background on your thing, Paul. That's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you.
Is
That's
that
one
like
of
a
mine.
green screen, or what is it?
No, it's just the background option that you have with. So it's just one of my drawings that I pulled up from my computer.
Oh, nice. I like it. Yeah,
That's
tried
how
to.
it's how we feel most of the time these days.
Yeah, no kidding. Right? That's pretty much it. I literally go from week to week just waiting for the next cold to kick in. I've been tested for COVID so freaking much lately because my company requires it anytime I even have the sniffles. So, God, I'm really getting fed up with it.
The first lockdown didn't hit me that hard, but this second one is hitting me a lot harder. I'm not nearly as productive. I'm much more angry about it.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Anyone working on any projects?
I'm still hammering away at the same piece of brocade that I've been hammering away at the last 2 weeks because I've been lazy and not doing it as much as I used to.
Can you show us?
I'd have to go downstairs and get it.
Oh, no worries. Okay.
No, I could do that. It's not like it's a million miles away. I'll be right back. Let's turn my camera off while I'm gone.
Okay. So last week, or was it last week or 2 weeks ago when Guido was here, it is the image of the Joker. My 6-year-old was like, "Who's that scary person?" No comment.
To be fair, that's not the first time he's had that asked about him.
I actually, with the start of the second lockdown, I had to sort of go into semi-quarantine because I was going in for a procedure. So it's not been so bad for me this time because it was something I had to do medically. And actually, I'm finding it a little easier this time because we've already experienced it once. I know it's going to end eventually.
Okay.
Can we, get through to that point?
Yeah. That thing Trudeau was saying about how everybody should be vaccinated by fall of next year kind of made it a little easier to tolerate. Well,
I was talking to our the associate registrar under whom I work, and of course they're taking it a semester at a time at the college. I was looking at her and saying, there's no way that we're going to be back in person before next summer at the earliest, and probably not till next fall. Yep. Not till we've all had 2 doses of vaccine.
Yeah.
Just, ooh.
Metallic and silk, my first one.
Don't you just love the way the silk feels in your fingers?
I'm glad you're creating.
Getting there. But the metallic and silk was really, really, really hard. It was a nightmare. But now I know the mistakes I made and I know how to fix them. So the next one I do, which will be less of a nightmare, but still a nightmare, will be coming.
Well, it's because they'll stretch at different rates too.
Actually, it has a lot. That part of it, yes. But because the metallic is only my weft, not my warp as well, I don't worry too much about stretch. Tension is a very slight issue. But mostly it's that the metallic wants to wrap itself around itself constantly. So you're constantly unwinding it and putting it through. And once you actually turn your cards, you can't pull it through because it'll just strip the metallic right off the silk thread that it's wound around. So you have to sort of set everything and then turn your cards and hope for the best that it actually worked in the first place. So there's mistakes in that one. It's still a usable piece. Like I'm not super disappointed in it. It's a replica of a 12th century handles to a reliquary bag from Germany.
Oh,
And the other one, the yellow and burgundy one, is from a 12th century belt.
nice, nice, nice.
And this is all leading up to my big project, which is going to be the trim of the Duke of Sicily. So that's eventually what I will be doing, if I get a loom big enough to handle it. What's everybody else doing?
Nothing is productive.
They're working.
Yeah.
Actually, no. I made a batch of cranberry and apple sauce. My first batch of stuff for this fall. Normally I'm
Ariana's just
well
healing.
ahead of this, and I've just been putting it off and putting it off. So the house smells good now.
My PhD application has gone to my reviewers and they've given it thumbs up. So that'll be going in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
To do Coast Salish dyeing. Yeah. Anyway, that's the latest from my end. A lot of work putting together an application.
I got the opportunity to listen in on the Coquitlam Guild's guild night, because it was done on Zoom and it was done in my living room, so I got to listen to it. And they had a presentation from a woman in Haida Gwaii, who's a basket weaver, doing bark baskets. It was very interesting. It was really fascinating, actually.
So every Tuesday I have a cedar bark weaving class that I take online. So it's mostly indigenous people, so they do a lot of regalia, but I just stick to baskets for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But it's been great. It's been a really probably the best night of the whole week, honestly.
Well, the woman they brought, they had, she does a lot of Salish regalia, but she also does like fedoras and and stuff that she just sells to people.
Yeah.
So it's really, I just don't need another hobby.
It's very addictive. I haven't inspected my own bark yet, so there's a guy he's from Haida Gwaii, but he lives in East Bend.
Yeah.
So you buy like a kit from him for like a basket. But then harvest season is May, June, July. So I'm hoping to harvest my own in the summertime. With all my free time, I guess, not going to events, or hopefully there'll be events. Or
I honestly don't think there'll be events until the last half, if we're lucky, of next year.
Yeah.
If we're lucky.
I think you're right.
Plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah, there's a
I
good
just hope-
chance we might not have any in the whole year.
I think we'll get to a large enough herd immunity that we could probably do some near the end of the year, like maybe Baronesses, or maybe earlier if we're lucky. Depends on how fast the vaccine rollout comes.
Yeah.
And how many of us are smart enough to go get it?
Oh, hopefully everybody, because if you're an anti-vaxxer, then and you're on my friends list on Facebook, just leave. Because I just don't want to have to deal with it.
Same with anti-maskers too, right?
Oh yes, I have no time. That's the only good thing about this whole pandemic, is it's reduced my friends list significantly. I had an argument with somebody where I discussed the fact that one of the reasons I chose to become a Canadian as opposed to just stay as an American was because the Canadian mindset is for the greater good of the country, as opposed to my individual rights trump your good.
Mm.
And the fact that that contamination has sort of seeped its way into Canadian culture is very distressing for me.
Yeah.
That's not why I chose to become a Canadian. It's like not even part of why I thought. It's like, no, I want a community that thinks community, not thinks individual. If I wanted to be a part of an individual, then I'd move back to the US and live there and dig myself a big hole to hide in.
Well,
with all my guns.
Some of us who have been living in Canada for a long time are appalled at what's coming out as well, just because that's not the Canada I grew up in.
Yeah, it's all that it's contamination from the US. Let's be completely honest here. We're contaminated with the constant bombardment of right-wing politics, right-wing policy from the US standpoint, which is far more right-wing than even Canadian right-wing, to be honest with you. So with that constant bombardment, I think it's sort of seeped into the Canadian culture, which is really.
I think we have to take a slice of responsibility. We've always had some very extreme areas that are right wing.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think
Parts of Ontario.
I think with the rise of the US right wing, it's sort of given the Canadian right wing sort of room to grow and a voice to be heard. Because people now pay attention to it. Mostly because they're worried about it, but still, any attention is good attention in their eyes.
I'm actually thinking that maybe we should just stop, reporting on the anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers and just deprive them of the publicity that they so desperately want. And then
I like the idea, but I disagree because we need to
get it out there. Yeah, it's a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah, if we don't talk about it, then they're going to continue to talk about it and they're going to persuade people. So we need to actually just this is wrong.
But just say, these idiots were doing this again. End of discussion.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah. I had a slight discussion with somebody this morning, and when I did my grocery shopping with somebody who's wearing their mask at their chin in the grocery store. Well, that's not doing you any good on your chin, and especially not doing me any good. Could you please pull it up the way it's supposed to be? And he gave me this dirty look and then did it. It's like, I don't care. You can give me a dirty look all you want, but don't be an idiot.
Yeah.
Well, it comes down to is my rights end where other people's rights begin.
For the greater good.
For the
We all share the same atmosphere. We're all breathing the same atmosphere.
I mean, I fully admit openly and freely that I am slightly left of most anybody. Like, I'd probably be slightly left of Karl Marx, for God's sakes. But I honestly do think that we should do things for the greater good.
Hi. Nice to meet y'all tonight. I got a question though, since the thing's already. So this thing is already started or not yet?
No.
We're still in the social phase.
We do it.
Okay.
We open the Zoom room half an hour early so that everybody can get a chance to chat with their friends, and we say hello to Guido as well.
Oh, well, thank you.
Oh,
I know that wasn't lovely with friends there.
But feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi,
Person from Atlantia, this is so
sorry, I'm not in
exciting.
garb.
It's all good.
It's okay, neither am I.
Nice background, Garrett. Nice to meet y'all. So y'all are recording?
We record the session. We're going to be it's still kind of debatable as to whether we post the entire social portion or we just trim it down to just the discussion portion. Some people want to see their friends who weren't able to make the session. So it's 6 of 1.
Okay.
The other kind
So my name is Abang Ibn Khalid.
Yeah.
I'm from the Kingdom of Atlantia, of the Barangay Hidden Mountain, of the Canton of Tier Sea Shore.
Well, welcome. It's very
Hey.
exciting. that
Welcome to
you're here.
Ontier and Tiri, Barony of Lionsgate.
Thanks. I've been wanting to visit y'all for a while. I went to Washington State years ago, but I never did play. I started playing in Atlantia. I want to come back to y'all.
Oh,
You're welcome here anytime.
wet cat.
So my persona is,
Excuse me.
well, Middle Eastern, I guess. My persona is late 13th, early 14th century from Andalusian Spain.
I used to live there.
Cool. So I guess my persona would be Moorish, I guess? Or would that count as more Middle Eastern, Near East, or Moorish at this point?
It would be, at that time period in that area, they would be Moors.
So mine counts as European persona or non-European? Sorry.
European, because the Islamic culture was all through Southern Europe at that time.
So my persona counts as more Eurasian, huh?
I would. I think, but that's just my opinion.
Oh, okay. So where's Lord Tenoch?
should be joining shortly,
Mhm.
Cool.
hopefully.
So, Sheree, I just messaged him.
Okay.
Feel free to pop in anytime and we can make sure everything's working.
I fixed the share screen thing. It turns out it's a security setting, not anything else.
Oh,
Huh.
okay, good. Okay, good.
Interesting.
Last week, when the speaker logged out because we made him a host, he actually ended the entire meeting. So we're all learning.
Oh, wow. Wow. So even though my persona might be Eurasian, I guess my name doesn't really count either, but so yeah, it's more Middle Eastern, Near East, I guess. So that's my main persona, but I've got at least 2 or 3 other personas I want to work on soon. A Landsknecht persona, 16th century Landsknecht drummer, German.
Oh, nice.
1st century AD Roman soldier, musician, like a trumpeter or something.
Oh,
And probably Ottoman Turkish, I guess.
Ottoman Empire was fascinating.
Ooh.
But I love 16th century German. It's one of my favorites.
Ooh, yes, that's what I want to try doing, being a Landsknecht drummer, even though it'd be European, though. It'd be like nearly out of period, huh?
No, it's still in there.
Wow.
My primary area of study right now is 16th century sword combat. So
Nice.
Oh, I should.
So what swords would I be using at that point, even though I'm be a Landsknecht drummer? Would I be
there's
using
a
sword?
billion of them. I would start with anything by Joachim Meyer. I would also go to Liechtenauer, which is sort of the forerunner of that. You can send me a message and I will give you a list.
Okay, I'll send you a want me to send you a message like in Zoom or send you a message like
You can find me on Facebook under my modern name. A lot of these people know who I am. I can send you I'll send you a private message with the information.
Go ahead. I'll a private message in Zoom?
Yep. I'll do that right now.
You can use the chat option to send one person a message. It's cool. I didn't realize that until it has the 2, and then you can pick everyone or just a specific person.
How's Woods doing, Brianna?
He's doing much, much better. Much.
Yay!
I know. He's napping and farting on the bedroom floor right now. We're definitely doing better.
Hello, everybody.
did I mute myself? Did I mute myself? No, I'm unmuted still, so I can actually talk. Never mind. I'm not opening my mouth because I think I'm muted. So why waste the energy? I'm actually unmuted and, you know, slithering. So, been overdosing on Lindyberg recently. So,
Do you want to learn the shortcuts
to
Zoom meeting to make sure that you're unmuted?
no, I just look at my screen first. If I'm, you know, halfway intelligent. I'm not halfway intelligent.
I was waiting for that.
I was too.
Oh dear, 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 dear. Oh,
Guido, I like how your backdrop is death, but it's right where your head is. It's
Yes,
very-
that's absolutely deliberate.
of course it is. It's brilliant. What is our topic tonight? I haven't seen any posts.
creating accessibility and an inviting atmosphere for non-Eurasian personas and cultures.
Ooh, cool.
Ooh, yeah.
Ooh, cool.
You want to read out the synopsis?
Yes, it
I
does.
can. I can. I can.
I was wondering which countries would count as the non-Eurasian.
New World, South America.
Uruguay. Hi, Uruguay.
Hi.
Hey, Uruguay. I think you count as Eurasian though.
Yeah, North. That's a tricky one. Yeah, the Moorish influence is mostly from North Africa, which kind of isn't African in the same sense that culture-wise. So it's interesting.
The talk is also about non-players who are of non-European descent, not just like accepting and supportive personas, but
Oh, gotcha. The
Right.
mundane,
What personas
welcoming
players?
mundane people of that background as well.
Ah, you mean like people of color?
We're trying.
Because, well,
So the speaker tonight, I believe, is indigenous.
oh, nice.
He can confirm that directly. But so that he's going to give his perspective on the SCA and hopefully some things that we can work on as a group.
Oh, nice.
And
I'm a
safe
person of
for
color
everybody.
myself. I'm black. And seeing other people of color and events and stuff is very rare where I am. Even in my King of Even War of the Wings, I didn't really see much people of color even there.
Really? So where is Atlantia?
I'm in South Carolina. Where I live, I'm in South Carolina.
Right. So you would think that there would be a decent proportion of people of color at events. So the fact that there isn't tells us that there is work to be done.
Yeah.
Estimation.
I
But there's
didn't
a
see much
whole.
people of color much of my events anyway. Even when, at least last year before the pandemic screwed it all up.
Yeah,
So
there's
the
a whole
Kingdom of
range of
Atlantia
reasons.
is trying. Trying to find a description of what the Atlantia encompasses. Okay, Atlantia encompasses all of Maryland, D.C., Washington, D.C., North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and a small portion of Georgia.
Okay. Used to be part of East Kingdom when it the big conglomeration that East Kingdom was the entire East Coast essentially.
Wow.
Did John go through the side of the house?
I don't know why.
All my cigarettes are gone.
Uh-oh.
No, he set up up on there and set up by the front door.
Fuck's sakes.
So mostly y'all are on tier, huh? I always wondered how the barter community and stuff is there.
Very strong Bardic community here.
I don't know.
Nice. I play instruments myself. I like to become a bard of Antier soon.
What sort of instruments? That being my area.
A rick. I play a rick and the zills, mainly. But I'm looking for a djembe too.
Not
Percussion.
instrument. Percussion.
Yep, percussion.
No, I'm a percussionist. I was that before I became joined the SCA.
Nice. I'm a percussionist too. What's your name?
My name is Kushag.
Kushag.
I also play recorders.
Nice.
other
You play
medieval
rummelpot
bands.
too?
Yes.
Oh, I have one as well. I have a rummelpot as well. I got one from Mistress Aza back in an event last year. So you know how the rick works? It's like an Arabic tambourine and stuff.
No, that I'm not familiar with that instrument, but I play these as well.
Ah. So what percussion are you familiar with? I like your recorder.
Thank you.
I used to play back in middle school.
I play. We have Naker with our group. We have a consort that we're working with. We have tambourine. We have nakers. I have zills.
Oh, nice. Do you belly dance as well? I do.
No, I do not belly dance as well.
Oh, I belly dance.
Oh,
I do belly dance with my
Kushag,
zills
lost
also.
opportunity.
Actually, I have taken some belly dance, but
Yeah.
like you guys don't want to see that. It's
I disagree.
not pretty.
Say, do you use
It's a
Facebook?
question of
I'd
practice.
like to add you.
Well, and since the hernia surgery, those muscles are not working very well.
Fair point. Fair point.
Can I talk to you later via Facebook?
I'm not on Facebook very much, but you can look me up and send me a private message. Again, I'll try and find a place to send you my contact information.
You can do so private. You can do so DMing me
Yeah.
via.
Just
I'll send you a DM. Would that work here in Zoom?
yes, if you do that, I'll respond with that.
Wow, we got lots of people showing up tonight. This is fantastic.
Oh,
Our host has just arrived in the waiting room.
yes. I wasn't worried. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, sorry, our speaker. Sorry.
Hey!
I am so sorry. We unfortunately had a very tragic event happen in Ansteora, and our first king passed away this weekend.
Oh, all right.
And
So sorry to hear that.
Oh wow.
we were having a bit of a memorial service for him, and as the current Kingdom Bard, it was appropriate for me to be there to
Oh
witness
goodness,
that.
yeah,
so.
that's.
Are you going to be okay? Would you rather we reschedule? Don't.
No, they're just wrapping up. It's I mean, at this point it's just gonna be, the old brass hats kicking the can around,
Fair enough.
and what have you, and that's for the most part that's what it was. But as the Kingdom Bard, it was important for me to be there and to witness that and to remember those stories, especially because the first king was also our first Kingdom Bard, or our first Premier Bard. Back before we had a Kingdom Bard, it was just a college, so it was quite amazing to hear all those stories and the heritage. And as the current Bard, the Premier Bard, it's important for me to note that history, which is oddly enough tied to my presentation today in a way. Remembering the history of our forefathers.
Exactly. So we're at 7 o'clock. So I'm just gonna fade back into the background and start admitting people. Do my introduction to our speaker tonight. If everybody can ask everybody to mute themselves if they're not already. And I'm sorry, I have a devil of a time with CTL pronunciation, but Lord. It's got to be a better name than Lord too, but I'll deal with that later. Teuctli, Tenochcacuicatl, Delmar. I hopefully haven't mangled that too much.
You know what? I always appreciate people that attempt to. I always say if you at least try, I'll be happy.
Thank you.
Besides, I'm here to explain. Otherwise,
he hails from the barony of Stargate in the Kingdom of Ansteora. Currently, Lord Tenoch serves as the current Premier Bard of Ansteora Kingdom Bardic Champion. His interests include New World studies with a special focus on the Aztec Empire, as well as bardic and musical activities from anywhere in the known world. Received his AOA last year. I would like to acknowledge before we start that I am currently residing on the unceded lands of the Teuctli First Nation. Thank you. Failed that out. Saying it 40 times this afternoon, and it is in your hands, sir.
What are we on? Are we on unceded land?
I don't know how, but I got muted. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, so everyone can see my screen. Thumbs up if you can. See the screen? Excellent. Okay. So, I am Lord Tenoch for sure. You don't have to give me the fancy full title, but if you want to hear the full title, it'd be Teuctli Tenochcacuicatl Delmar. And I'm here today to talk to you about... Oh, this is the wrong presentation. I'm so sorry. This is what it's like when you teach so many classes at once. And it's being recorded too. Love that.
You could have given that one as well. We'd have been just as interested.
Oh, it's my favorite one. It's my personal mundane work. So, okay. The correct one that we are doing today is going to be on the New World and the SCA and talking about creating accessibility and an inviting atmosphere for non-Eurasian personas and cultures. So I always like to start with how to pronounce my name. Everyone always asks. It's always good info to give. So my name is obviously not standard English. And it's fun because it's in two languages, technically. So the first two parts are in classical Nahuatl, which would have been the language spoken in the Aztec Empire, for the most part. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then Delmar is, of course, the Spanish Coroific. It would have been the surname that would have been common at the time. And to pronounce it, it's actually a lot easier than you think. It's very phonetic. So the Teuctli is just my title, just means Lord. Tenochcacuicatl would mean Song of the Tenochca or Song of the Tenochtitlan, and then Delmar's of the sea. But of course, just call me Tenoch. Tenoch is fine. I mean, I get tongue-tied trying to say my own name half the time if I'm not ready for it. It's a big word. There's a lot of syllables in there. But I mean, if you can attempt to pronounce Old Norse and Gaelic, I think you can try something that's a little bit more phonetic. And I do want to start with a disclaimer. I am speaking for a lot of people today, and so I want to be very clear that I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of an advocate and not so much as a representative when it's not directly related to me. A lot of my experiences can be representative of other people within the community, but one thing to note is that the New World is kind of a lot. There's kind of a lot going on there. We talk about the New World. And we have this very neat little title for a very messy thing. It's a very simple Eurocentric title for essentially all of the Americas in the Western Hemisphere. And we group all these cultures under one title, but at the same time, there are a lot more individual distinct cultures, and by some accounts, there are arguably more distinct individual cultural identities in the New World than there are in Europe in period. And even within our own communities, we don't really agree on how to talk about ourselves beyond just general indigenous or Hispanic or Latino. For example, let's talk about indigenous Americans. Let's talk about what some people might refer to themselves as American Indian, or they might refer to themselves as Indigenous American, or they might refer to themselves as First Nation. There are different terms that people prefer for themselves when referring to indigenous identity. The second one right here, this is me personally. So I was born here in the U.S., but my family is from Mexico. I can be referred to as Mexican American. I can be referred to as Chicano. I can be referred to as Chicano. I can be referred to as just American because I was born here and not in Mexico. I could also be referred to as estadounidense, which is a Spanish word for a U.S. citizen because we have that word in Spanish. I can be Mexican. I can be Latino. I can be Hispanic. I can be Latinx. There are so many terms for how we identify ourselves. And that makes it really complicated to try to talk to other people about self-identity because all of these terms are valid in one way or another. Our identities are that complex. There's no one cookie cutter mold that we all fit into. But an important thing to note is that most of us that identify with the New World, at least especially in the SCA, a lot of us have direct lineage to it. There are direct lineage indigenous communities that exist to this day. There are still preserved indigenous communities within the Americas that are directly related to period cultures. Some of them are even so isolated that they have not had outside exposure. And especially from my perspective as someone who is Latino, I usually use the term Latino or Chicano to refer to myself. Those of us who are Latino or Chicano, most of us are at least part indigenous. That's just kind of how that works, We're at least partially indigenous. We're partially European. We have a very complicated heritage to try to suss out. It gets very, very messy. I'm going to show you some maps, and we're going to talk about why it gets messy through some maps. So here, this is the New World, or what we would refer to as the New World, which would be this Western Hemisphere. So pretty much, for the most part, if it was in the Western Hemisphere, it was considered part of the New World in period. So that is a lot of land, right? That's a lot of land right there. Okay. This is Mexico before it was split to the smaller mass it is today. So This area, the reason why I included this map is because this top part right here is part of Mexico. If you all know your geography, you also know that this is part of modern day US. So there are many of us who, I have family that lived in this part of the Americas forever. And, you know, the expression, and I'm going to translate it real quick from Spanish to English. Like, the expression is that I didn't cross the border crossed me. Yeah, there are some of us that we just happened to become American citizens suddenly one day. So, you know, we are rooted in here, but we're talking about Mexico because some of you may know I do a lot of Mesoamerican and Aztec empire studies. So let's kind of work backwards from there. We know the Aztec Empire is related to Mexico. This is what Mexico would have looked like before we got started. This is what Mexico looks like now. So we've cut a significant chunk of it off, but still in relation to the whole world, you know, that is a significant landmass if we're talking about the whole world. That right there is what we refer to in scope. We talk about the Aztec Empire. We're talking about this particular region of North America, or sometimes this is referred to as Central America, especially this part right here. But that's the part of the Americas we talk about when we talk about the Aztec Empire. As you've noticed, like we've once again basically halved our landmass from Mexico. This is what is often believed to be the Aztec Empire territory right before the downfall of the empire itself, before full Spanish colonial powers took over. So, you know, even in that area that we saw previously, there's really only a small portion that is distinctly Aztec. And that is because there's a lot of people going on here, and there's a lot of places. It's a very complex system. I do want to point out that here in the key, we have tributary provinces. That is how we're referring to the Aztec Empire, because the Aztec Empire isn't one group of people. It's a group of people in servitude to a central city-state. I like to tell people it's more similar to the Roman Empire, where, you know, not everyone was Roman in the Roman Empire, but if the Roman Empire claimed you, then I guess you're Roman now. They just kind of claimed peoples and properties, and, you know, they incorporated into the empire, and now it's part of the empire. The Aztec Empire is very much the same way, where these people, these various groups are all individual groups. Those are the names of those individual groups of people. But that's what we consider the Aztec Empire. Let's talk about that a little further, though. If you zoom in right here, this lake right here is going to be the main lake. Some of you might know as Lake Texcoco. Lake Tenochtitlan is another name that's used sometimes. That is going to be where your head of the Aztec Empire is. That little tiny part right there. And if you can see, there are 3 red dots. Those are where the Triple State Alliance, which was basically the capital of the Aztec Empire, which would be Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tacuba. Those are going to be the 3 capitals of the Aztec Empire. That's around where they're located, in that little tiny region there. So if you blow it up, that's what this little region looks like. And if you see every one of those triangles, that is an individual group of people. That is an individual village. And it is not beyond reason to think that each person in that village, or each village itself, excuse me, would have had its own distinct cultural identity. So even in this tiny little region here, we have easily a couple hundred individual settlements where people are basically functioning as their own. They're just tributary provinces to that one person. So this is one of the reasons why it's hard to talk about culture in the New World as one thing, because it's such a hugely vast group of people. I talked about classical Nahuatl, which was what my name is in. Classical Nahuatl would have been considered the lingua franca, not the actual language of the whole empire, just the lingua franca in which all the rulers and the tradesmen would have spoken in. And that's what we believe it to be, at least. And the reason why we say that is because we know for Nahuatl, where classical Nahuatl comes from, the root family, there's at least 30 to 60 dialects of Nahuatl that we can identify now. So we don't know how that would have been in period, but at least now we could identify between 30 to 60 different individual dialects of that language, of that particular indigenous language family. I teach a fantastic class on that if you ever want to nerd out on language with me. That's one of my favorite classes to teach. But yeah, so I wanted to show you that kind of like telescope, because I think it's important for us to understand that there's a lot of things, there's a lot of places we come from. There's not just any one identity. Even when you're talking about someone that's like me that says, oh, well, I do Aztec Empire studies. Yeah, but like, what part of the Aztec Empire are you talking about? For the record, I specifically focus on Mexica people, but like I said, that's even also complicated because how do you explain cultural identity in a situation where people would adopt other people's identities and what have you? Those of you who are, possibly First Nations or Indigenous, you also have similar stories, I am assuming, because I know my friends that have told me who they themselves are Indigenous talk about the way that tribes work and adoptions and what have you, and the complexities therein. It's really hard to talk about us as a uniformed identity. And for that reason, I think it's really important that we understand our diversity. There's this joke that, everybody gets one. You get one thing you get to be known for. But I don't think that's really true. There's a lot of things that make up us. This is a really pretty famous graphic from the equity and diversity, diversity, equity, and inclusion seminar from the SCA, where it shows the different things that make up us as a person, thinking styles, language, ethnicity, experiences, et cetera, et cetera. These are the various things that help make up our identity. And through this, it can help explain our diversity. One important thing to notice is that, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of unique aspects on it. And there's areas here where we could be multiple things, I identify as Chicano. That is the identity I use, Chicano being Mexican American. I also know that for a fact, I know that I'm part Mayan because I know where my grandmother comes from in Mexico distinctly. And it's a very heavily Mayan population. So I know that I am part Maya. I also know that I am part Irish randomly because my grandfather got or my great grandfather got a mail order bride from Ireland back when some really weird stuff was going on in the settlement of Texas. So I know that I'm part Irish because my grandmother specifically, celebrates Irish holidays, even though she is Mexican because of part of her heritage. So that's something that I grew up with. There's our own personal backgrounds and identities can be very complex even within our subgroups. And it's important for us to recognize that because that helps inform where we're coming from in the SCA. I know this sounds like a lot of filler and a lot of background, but the idea that I hope I'm trying to get across is that, we're very diverse people. Even when we focus on a specific thing within Indigenous communities and the New World, we often have very various backgrounds and various approaches and viewpoints and different avenues on how to get there, as I'm sure everyone else in the SCA does. Those of you who do Norse play, I'm sure that you all don't play Norse exactly the same way. I'm sure that some of you focus on Norse and you're more interested on the bardic aspect of Norse, or skaldic, of Norse. I'm sure that some of you are more interested on the actual fighting and the fighting styles and what have you there, or some people are more interested in cooking. The same way you can have different interests within that one cultural aspect, we have those too. And it's important to understand and kind of respect that because that kind of helps set up why we all have different needs. When those of us from the New World come forth and say, hey, I don't feel like I'm being supported. Well, it's because I focus on this, I focus on that. Even those of us within the same identity group who have most of these the same are going to have different wants and needs. Real quick on equality, equity, and justice. I like to use the terms good, better, and best. So this is a pretty famous comic. I see it go around all the time on Facebook, especially in all the SCA DEI groups. So inequality is these two children not being able to receive apples equally. The tree leans one way, so one child is more likely to get the apples. So equality is both the children being given ladders that still only really benefits one child as opposed to both. This is when we start getting to good. That's a good attempt. So let's try something better. What's the better thing we can do? Well, of course, we could shoot for equity, which is customizing the tools and making sure that both people have what is essentially an equal opportunity at achieving something. That is equity. That is what we mean by equity. But then, of course, we want to do what's best, right? So what is best is justice. And what we mean by justice is changing the system itself. And that's one of the things we need to think about when we talk about allyship is how much are we aiming for? How much are we aiming to do? Are we just aiming for equality? Are we aiming for equity? Or are we aiming for justice? What are we changing? Are we changing ourselves? Are we changing those around us? Are we changing the system? Where are going to be the most direct impacts of the most direct effects of what we're doing? You know, fun comic. You see this go around a lot. I think it's fantastic. Everybody loves the Giving Tree and how sad it is, unfortunately. But what can you do about it except, you know, strive for justice? So inclusion. This one is actually, for me, the biggest one out of DEI. A lot of people understand diversity. Once you explain equity, it's a pretty easy concept to understand when you have a graphic. Inclusion is really tricky, and this is when it starts to get really nuanced and complicated. Okay, so I like to put this as an example between tolerance and acceptance. The reason why I have these two juxtaposed is because they both have the kind of facade of inclusion, but they don't exactly have inclusion in the same sense. Tolerance means, you know, kind of just tolerating someone's existence. Yeah, you can be here. That's fine. You know, just, yeah, there's a chair right there. Go ahead and sit in the corner. Acceptance is more actually actively working to include someone. Oh yeah, you can be here. Hold on, you know, let me make some room at our table. We can get you a seat right here. You can sit right next to us. Actually striving to include someone. There's a fantastic graphic, once again, taken from SCA DEI works. Their presentations are great. I take no credit for the graphics that I keep stealing from them. But you right here have this diagram of exclusion, which is, you know, everyone on the outside. So here's the inside, it would be the majority group. The outside would be the minority groups. Segregation is kind of giving this like separate but equal, you know, minority groups over there, majority groups here. Integration would be, okay, we'll include the minority groups in our play, but this is going to be the specific sector that is cut out for them. It is only this little area for them. And, you know, at this point, we're still only tolerating their existence. We're not really accepting them. Because if we were accepting them, we would be here at full inclusion, where they would be fully ingrained and actually involved in our activities. And not just here, but not really here and present within our play. I have some interesting terminology here I like to use. I have an issue with novelty. I feel like sometimes when it comes to New World personas, especially because that's the new hot button topic, I've been told by some former laurels in my kingdom that they felt this way about Middle Eastern studies back when that was first becoming popular. But I feel like sometimes it's more of a case of novelty as opposed to actual interest or respect. What I mean by novelty is, let's just look at the regular definition, you know, the quality of being new, original, or unusual. Second definition, a small and inexpensive toy or ornament. Okay, not a great definition either way, is it? You know, and it has two separate definitions, but one of them really informs the other if you think about it. You know, sometimes I feel like my New World studies are just kind of an expensive toy that people pick up and play with when they're bored, and then just set down and walk away from whenever they're done with it. And they see something new and shiny in the horizon. And that's something that a lot of New World Scadians I've heard them talk about is they're worried about novelty and being seen as a novelty right now. Oh, there's so much, you know, social justice stuff going around, so of course people are interested in New World studies. Of course people, like, you know, are gravitating to us. We're the hot thing. We're the thing on the shelf that everyone can't get enough of right now. You know, it can be a little bit of a novelty. It can be kind of creating us. It could kind of be putting us in a position of novelty, as well as being the diversity hire. This is my other pet peeve when it comes to these kind of things in inclusion. And so by diversity hire, I mean the minority that's kind of hired to meet the quota. And the sad part about this one is it can be unintentional. You know, even the best intentions can have unpleasant consequences. I've had times where people have asked for my opinion on something because I was the minority in the group. And it's not fun. It's not great, you know? I appreciate people reaching out to me and asking for my opinion, and I think that very much we do need to be doing that. We need to be reaching out and getting other people's opinions. But at the same time, you know, sometimes you can unintentionally make people feel like they're part of a quota. Sometimes you can make people feel like they just need to tick off so many boxes, and you happen to be around, so you get to be the box that gets ticked off. These are things to be mindful of, and I don't mean to make anyone feel bad about this. I know that these are some sensitive topics, but at the same time, I think it's important that we're mindful of it, especially those of us who want to be really good allies, that we can do these things unintentionally, unfortunately. So let's get to the super hot button topic that everybody loves, which is cultural appropriation. This is the most polarizing one. Our Society DEI officer has a fantastic class on this. I'm not going to pretend to do it the justice that she does. As a matter of fact, I've heard her herself say that she can't do it justice in the 1 hour that she's often asked to teach it. So we're clearly not going to solve this problem. But I do want to at least make you aware of what cultural appropriation is, and then there are a few hard points I am going to hit on regarding the subject. So, very straightforward definition. Cultural appropriation refers to the use of objects or elements of a non-dominant culture in a way that doesn't respect their original meaning, giving credit to their source, or reinforces stereotypes or contributes to oppression. Very straightforward. I love this definition. This is probably my favorite definition that I found on it. Cultural appropriation is nuanced and layered. It's not easy to understand. Hence, not being able to cover the topic properly in a 1 hour class, let alone on one slide. But it's also important that we're mindful of it, and it's crucial that we do attempt to try to figure out what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what can and cannot be considered cultural appropriation, especially because in the SCA, we often have the slippery slope of appropriation versus appreciation. This happens in many cases. It's not exclusive to this. This is just a mundane problem in general. What is the difference between appropriation and appreciation? I'm not going to pretend to answer that for you today. I'm not. We do not have enough time to get into that. But that is something for us to be mindful of. And it is, as I say, it's a slippery slope argument. What is the barrier? Is the line straight in the sand? Is it gray? Is it shades of gray? And on top of that, different people have different opinions on what is appropriation and what is appreciation. It can get very complicated and very messy, and it's just important to be mindful of that there is that problem between those two sides of the same coin, because that's what they are. They're two sides of the same coin. One thing I do want to point out though is that cultural appropriation is pretty much, for the most part, often rooted in privilege. And what I mean by privilege is I will have a full slide on that. But I'm giving you an example so that you can kind of understand what it is now, and then we'll circle back to it and hit it a lot harder in the future. But, New World studies typically are more accepted by people that are not indigenous, and they do not come from New World backgrounds. And that often comes from the fact that, a lot of these people have peerage, or they have essentially time in the SCA, so they had time to establish themselves back when New World wasn't really a thing, and so they've established themselves, and New World is now their fun new interest that they're excited about. It can be because the group is pretty much exclusively English speaking. Those of us who come from indigenous backgrounds oftentimes speak, indigenous languages, or for myself, those of us who are Hispanic, some of us only speak Spanish or speak Spanish predominantly. I'm very fortunate and actually do have a privilege in that I speak English much better than my Spanish actually at this point. So, I do have a privilege in that I can speak English, and that makes it easier for me to talk about New World studies than someone from Mexico would be, directly from Mexico, that may not have as much English skill. There are many reasons why this can happen, but it's important to understand that that's one of the issues with privilege, is that it often means that people from those backgrounds don't get to actually share the information from their own backgrounds, because someone else that's more privileged in the particular group we're in this case the SCA, gets to have precedence and gets to have their voice heard more. All right, we're gonna blaze through these, but these are some very hard points I want to stick on. There's a lot of stuff that's debatable about cultural appropriation. In my opinion, these are some things that are not debatable. So no amount of book knowledge, scholarly study, or cultural immersion can substitute for or replace the personal experiences of one within their native culture. No amount of reading books, no amount of trips abroad, no amount of college degrees, if we're being honest, displaces the experience of somebody who grew up in that habitat natively. You know, that is their native culture. And on that note, you know, I'm sorry, but you are not insert culture here just because you have researched it extensively or have a persona based on it or focus on the SCA or have been living there, et cetera, et cetera. I feel for the most part, most people understand this, but I have met some people who, you know, they think they are 14th century Italian from Florence. And I'm just kind of like, I don't know. Like, you're also like Joe born in New Jersey. So like, don't think it's the same as someone like, for example, my fiance, whose family actually was born in Italy and came over as immigrants and dealt with World War II and what have you. It's a very challenging sticking point, and I know that it can ruffle some feathers. I'm not saying that like I said, I'm not making any rules on cultural appropriation today, but I do want to point out that you can't identify that way, and that does cause problems for those of us who do identify with these New World cultures. Those of us who either identify as Hispanic or indigenous or what have you. On that note, if you do not belong to that culture's community, please do not speak as a representative of that culture. Please do not claim to be a primary resource. Please do not speak on behalf of us. Please do not think that your opinion gets equal weight in consideration with those from the community as far as those communities' opinions of things that are happening to them. That one's a little harder to understand, but what I mean is, you know, if someone is saying, hey, this is really offensive to my culture, maybe your opinion does not matter as much as their opinion because they're speaking from the perspective of their own culture. As far as like if it's offensive or not is what I mean to say here. It is a sticky point. This, like I said, these are kind of some of the ugly ones. These are ones that we could talk about a little bit further. I don't mean to offend people, but I do think it's important that we remember these things. You know, we need to be respectful of where people come from. And we need to respect the fact that when people come from somewhere, it's deeply personal to them. It's deeply personal, and it's really hard for them to speak up when something slights them. If we want to be really good allies, we have to understand that a lot of what we need to do is actually just kind of step back a couple steps and let them speak. Let them have their say and support them. You do a lot more good in supporting someone as an ally than you do speaking over them. This is the last one. This is the last very, very ruffly feather point that I want to make. One person or a small group from within the community cannot give you permission on behalf of the whole community. That's self-explanatory. Gosh. Just because one of your friends gives you the card to, you know, permission to use a slur or to use a term, maybe that does not give this permission to everyone else. You know, the G word comes to mind for those who do anything involving Roman Chaw cultures. You know, just because one person said that you can say it doesn't mean everyone else can. There's a lot of feelings with this one. This one is probably one of the ones that I'm going to be hard and fast with. One person does not give you permission on behalf of the whole culture. Please remember that. Okay. Sorry, I'm checking my phone. We're actually doing really good on time. Excellent. Okay. The privilege problem. You know, the first quote is how I often hear it explained. If you don't have to think about it, it's a privilege. I like to add the second part because this is the part that I experience more often personally. If you are upset that your actions unintentionally offended others, you're likely coming from a place of privilege. You know, if you are used to being in a position where what you do is okay, and someone tells you, hey, that's not really okay actually, that probably suggests that you come from a position of privilege, or that you were privileged enough to have people around you that supported you unanimously without giving you much questions or considerations. I do want to point out, though, we've talked about privilege a lot. It isn't inherently bad. It's just kind of a thing that exists, unfortunately. Like I said, I have a privilege compared to other Latinos in that I can speak English fluently. It's something that I can very easily do and comes naturally to me because of where I was born and raised and what have you. So I have the privilege of being able to speak English so I can communicate a lot of my thoughts and wants and needs better than someone else, and perhaps some of my cousins or what have you. I'm also a little bit lighter skinned than Latinos tend to be, at least from what we conventionally think, because South America is a little different, but that's a whole story. You know, I am a little lighter skinned. That gives me kind of a bit of a privilege in that in some scenarios I can pass, but some scenarios I can't pass. I am very much in between and get confused for races all the time. But for the most part, people are more likely to listen to me than they are, say, my grandmother, because I'm lighter skinned and I can speak English. My grandmother was darker skinned and could not speak English. So I do have a privilege that she did not have. Does that make me a bad person? I'd like to think not, hopefully. You know, I would like to think that I'm not abusing that privilege, but at the same time, it's something I need to be mindful of. And that's one of the things that we should understand is when we talk about privilege, you know, it's not inherently bad. You're not a bad person because you have privilege. That's not how that works. That is unfortunate that we have those extremes in our mentality, unfortunately. In truth, the issue with privilege is how we use it. And the fact that if we don't recognize it, it often lends itself to unfair and unjust systems in which we don't feel the need to change things because due to our privilege, things are okay. And it's only when things don't go our way and aren't okay for us that we start to think, hey, maybe the system has problems, as opposed to people who all along have been saying, hey, the system has problems. I have never felt okay in the system. Can we talk about this? That is those situations where we need to talk about addressing privilege. So please don't feel bad just because you have privilege. That's not remotely what I want to get across. It's more about being mindful of the privilege we have and the advantage we have over others, and learning how we can bridge that gap. That is one of the things we really need to focus on in allyship. I do want to point out kind of what I talked about a little bit there, is that, you know, privilege is often a form of gatekeeping, and in the SCA, that means that those who have the privilege of having either common personas, like I said, Norse or Gaelic or just European in general, those who speak English, because there are some Scadians that don't speak English. You know, we don't think about that, but there are Scadians that don't speak English. I've met quite a few, actually, personally. There are Scadians that, you know, they live in very populated areas where there's a lot of activity going on. These are all different forms of privilege that make it easier to play in the game, as opposed to those who don't speak English, don't have a common persona, have a perspective or interest that isn't widely accepted, those who live in remote areas and don't have direct support networks that are close by. These are all things that in privilege that can affect their ability to play, and these are all forms of gatekeeping, whether we like it or not. In gatekeeping, we usually talk about that in terms of preventing someone from being able to participate in something. In this case, I'd say privilege is unintentionally gatekeeping, as opposed to actively gatekeeping, which is where someone says, no, you can't do that thing because of this, which sometimes happens, let's be honest, but for the most part, I feel like as a whole, the SCA is moving away from that. It's nothing personal, except it kind of is. You know, whether we like it or not, mundane life influences SCA play and SCA life. We want to think that the SCA is 100% escapism fantasy. It really isn't, unfortunately. Mundane life, it rears its ugly head, whether we like it or not. It can directly affect us as far as time or money or whatever other resource. It can directly affect us in ability to play. Those of us who have chronic illnesses or disabilities, you know, if SCA was 100% escapism, we wouldn't be having a virtual Zoom class about this during the middle of a worldwide pandemic, because we could fully escape from our mundane life. But unfortunately, mundane life really does influence a lot of the SCA and a lot of what we do. Along with that, mundane life can be part of the problem when it comes to being more accepting to those who are New World personas or New World players. You know, one of the reasons why is because when we advocate for the SCA as in a full escapist fantasy, oh, this has no place in my SCA because I don't deal with mundane politics. when we advocate for something like that, we are glossing over many of the barriers that people face and experience when they first attempt to join, especially if they have a non-standard persona. I'm not reading all the questions in the chat, unfortunately, because I'm trying to get through the material, and I'm glancing over here now and then. But I have heard someone say in there, what is an uncommon persona? I am mestizo, both mundanely and in the SCA. I am partially indigenous in the SCA as far as I have a persona that is part Spanish and part New World. In real life, I am literally the product of Spanish and New World mixing together. I have an uncommon persona in the SCA in that there are not many New World players that I know of. I can count on a couple of hands, actually, most of the ones that on my 2 hands now, because we have a Facebook group of all the New World players that we have. I can tell you for a fact that my persona is considered non-standard because I had multiple people tell me that you're gonna have a hard time doing that. I had a couple people approach me actually recently and tell me, when I first started in the SCA, I actually wanted to have a New World persona, and I was discouraged against doing so because it wasn't really common, it wasn't standard, it's hard to document. That's one of the big gatekeepery things. It's hard to document, which is not super true sometimes, but that's a whole discussion. But sometimes when people will say like, oh, it's hard to document your persona, or it's hard to document this thing, so maybe you don't want to do that. And I've had people personally tell me, I gotta say, like, you're a lot braver than I am because you are doing a New World persona, and I feel a little cheap because honestly, I'm doing a mixed persona between New World and Spain Old World, because that's my cultural identity, and I wanted to explore those two facets of myself and how those mix together. But historically speaking, the SCA has not always been welcoming to non-standard and unusual or different personas. It's always been a trial. I've spoken to people who've done Middle Eastern, who were some of the first people to ever do Middle Eastern, and talk about how that was tough to do. I've spoken to people who have done various Asian personas and talk about how hard that was at first to do. Our SCA is Eurocentric by design. Not saying that it was their fault for making it that way. I'm just saying that was the original intention as far as how the structure was made. And so it's been kind of hard to incorporate other groups in there. Historically speaking, the SCA and the mundane world have not been super friendly to those of us who are minorities. And in many ways, it still isn't. Oh boy, is it not sometimes. I used to work in immigration. I could tell you a lot of stories about that whole thing. But yeah, it hasn't always been easy for people of color or minorities or indigenous folk to play in the SCA because it hasn't always been super welcoming. And on top of that, it's also really hard for us to hear those kind of things because the SCA is really it's really an opportunity for us to explore our cultural identity. Historically speaking, exploring an indigenous identity was discouraged, it was persecuted, sometimes that history was intentionally erased for the sake of conquering or getting control over those peoples. There is a lot of baggage when it comes to trying to explore our identity. I can tell you that from my own personal experience. I can tell you my grandmother, her Mayan family, there's like no association with them because once we got Spanish blood in there, that was it. We're good. We don't have to do that lesser than Mayan blood because that's how that worked back then. And there's still a lot of stuff like that to this day. Let's talk about my light skin privilege. There's a really nasty expression in Spanish called mejorando la raíz, which means bettering the race, and it means to marry someone with a lighter skin than you, so that you can improve the chances of your offspring and basically get them more and more distant from their indigenous roots. Not cool, not fun at all. Don't love it one bit. But just so you know, these are kind of some of the backgrounds that we're coming from mundanely. And then when we try to join the SCA and say, well, hey, like I really want to, like, I've lost this connection with my heritage. I really want to explore it. And to have someone say, well, it's kind of hard to do. Why don't you do like, do like Irish or Norse like everyone else? It's not great, man. That's pretty disappointing. it's not just a hobby for me. Like this is me exploring my heredity really. I started learning classical Nahuatl because I was fascinated by it. I heard a lot of music in there's a lot of Mexican artists that sing in the language, and then I thought it was a really cool and fun language. And then I started taking some classes mundanely at the the embassy that we have here locally, and so they were hosting classes in Nahuatl. So I was joining and doing that, and then I found out about the SCA. So I was doing all this before I found out about the SCA, and then I met my fiance, and he introduced me to the SCA, and I was like, oh, awesome! This is really cool. I can explore this historical nerdy thing that I've been like gushing over with other nerds, you know. But what I'm saying and trying to say with that story is that I had a very personal journey to coming to my identity with my indigenous roots and just my general New World mestizo persona. There was a whole personal thing going in the background. It's not just a hobby for me. It's not just me jumping in on something because I thought it was fun or cool. And that's how a lot of New World personas feel. A lot of them use it as an opportunity to explore their indigenous roots. Especially those who are First Nations or Indigenous Americans. I'll probably use those two terms interchangeably. Those are the ones I hear most of the time. But especially people from those backgrounds will often, you know, literally stolen generation is how we refer to some of their backgrounds. A lot of them will use this opportunity to explore their roots and to share their culture with others because they weren't always allowed to share their culture with others. They often had to keep it hush-hush. Because of this, it's very deeply personal to a lot of us. These New World studies and these New World personas and activities and what have you, they are incredibly personal. And that's why we do take offense easier, if I'm being honest, you know? People have told me that I take things personally. Yeah, I do take things personally because it's personal. I don't know how else to explain it. You know, I'm not just playing dress up on the weekends. I'm trying to rediscover roots that were intentionally erased. It can be really personal, and there is something to be said about having some nuance and learning how to express that to other people. But at the same time, I don't find it insulting for you to tell me that I take this personally. Yeah, I do. It's personal. I do take it personally. I'm not ashamed of that. So representation. Representation matters a lot, like it really does. Meaningful representation. It really, really matters, and it's the difference between us being heard or ignored. And I mean that in the sense that being meaningfully in a position where you are representing others makes a huge difference, as opposed to just being in a figurehead position where you're used as an example of representation. This goes back to that diversity hire thing, you know. Just because we have one person of color on the board doesn't mean that we have full representation of the interests of people of color, because we have that one person that we hired to put on the board. It's really important that we do keep in mind that we want to give representation to those who deserve it and who can use it in a good way, but we want to make sure that it's going to be meaningful and that is going to have a good positive impact, and it's not just performative. Kind of going back to the diversity thing we're talking about, you know, hardly anyone is just one thing, but nobody is everything. When it comes to representation, there's not one perfect example of representation. And oftentimes, one of the challenges in this is that we're often asked to represent other cultures that are just distantly or kind of related, or we're assumed to be related to. And this can cause issues of representation. This is one of the reasons why at the beginning of this presentation I said that I'm trying to mostly speak from the perspective of an advocate as opposed to someone who's a representative of the New World, because the New World, as we saw, is a lot of things. There's a lot going on in the New World. Very little I am directly involved in, even mundanely. But I can still speak as an advocate that we should be conscious of all these people, and by proxy, my own experience is representative of others, not of everyone, and if we're being honest, probably not of most, but it can be representative of others in the sense that they have similar experiences of me, and maybe sometimes slightly different, but at least maybe sometimes it's close enough that it could be a jumping point for discussion. Not there's nobody that is everything. There's no one perfect minority, unfortunately. And that comes with flaws too. There is a double-edged sword to representation though, and that is emotional labor. So emotional labor, as it was originally intended by Arlie Hochschild, who is a sociologist, refers to the work of managing one's own emotions that are required by certain professions. So this definition of emotional labor usually refers to, for example, being in the service industry and being forced to smile and be happy and perform everything with joy and exuberance and manage your own emotions in the background, even if it's killing you and eating you on the inside because you can't fully express how you actually do want to express yourself. That is the original intended definition. More colloquially, it usually refers to unpaid social labor that really isn't acknowledged. Informal unpaid counseling, which is, giving counsel to someone else, primarily for their benefit and not for yours, even though it's often about understanding your own perspective. And just labor that involves you using your own emotions that isn't reciprocated. It is usually, if I was to be doing emotional labor, I would be working through my own emotions for the benefit of others without any particular regard to my emotions and to how I feel. Oftentimes, emotional labor places the onus for social change or the blame for the lack thereof on the slighted party. So let's talk about minorities. I'm a minority. I come from that background. I feel comfortable talking about this one. We're often asked to speak on behalf of all minorities, and we're often asked to speak up if something is wrong. We are often asked to be the change we want to see. So if things need to be better for minorities, then why aren't the minorities speaking up? That is an example of some prime emotional labor that I have been experienced to firsthand. And that's not to say that you can't want to do it. I mean, this is one of those uncomfortable ones where like there's a lot of overlap and we can all experience it. I mean, me being here today is a form of emotional labor. This is me talking about some very deviant personal things and trying to condense them into some bite-sized form that I can share with others. It's unfortunately a form of emotional labor. I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to do it. That's why I'm here today, because I understand that it's a thankless job and I'm willing to accept that responsibility. But it'd be wrong of me to expect that of every other minority. We have a whole New World SCA group on Facebook. It would be wrong of me to reach out to each of them and say, hey, do you want to speak with me at this kind of event? I don't want to put that onus on them as well. I'm willing to accept the responsibility. I'm willing to do this work. I'm willing to take on that emotional labor. There are some people that are just willing to do more work than others and that accept that sometimes things are thankless jobs. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have pelicans. There are people that are just willing to accept that sometimes work has to get done and you don't always get paid for it. That is kind of the gist of emotional labor. The problem with emotional labor is that we often expect it out of other groups. And that's one of the things to consider here. The common question with emotional labor is, why didn't you tell or ask me? Why didn't you tell me that bothered you? Why didn't you ask me to do this differently in the moment when it bothered you? And the common answer is, we really shouldn't have to. Like, it's not our... this is kind of a not nice thing to say, but it's not our responsibility to make sure that your feelings aren't hurt. At least as far as like us voicing our needs and what have you. It's important for you to understand that when you're talking to minority groups, when you're talking to New World Scadians, indigenous people, they don't have a responsibility to make sure that you feel good about it. They also don't have a responsibility to walk you through it. You have to meet them halfway. At the very least, you have to meet them halfway. There has to be equal work on both sides. And expecting the onus to be on them for always speaking up when something's wrong, or always expecting them to rise up to be the change that this community needs. That's taxing. That is taxing. That is some taxing emotional labor to put on other people. There are people that are willing to do it. Not saying there aren't. I'm here today because I wanted to do this. Not remotely saying that I didn't want to. But I accepted that this is work, and there's some people that don't have that in them, and that's fine. It's not their job. It's not their job to be the representation for an entire community, or in this case, an entire 3 continents, because we're talking about the New World. So, Eurocentrism. We've kind of talked about Eurocentrism. I do want to talk about a little bit about this because this ties into all the problems that New World players often have in the SCA. Just checking my time real quick. Okay, we're good. So Eurocentrism talks about how the worldview that is often held where European cultures are the norm and everything else is the other. An example of this is Western culture and Western civilization. When we talk about Western culture and Western civilization, we're usually talking about European cultures, related cultures to the European cultures, and cultures that derived a common heritage from those European cultures. For example, in the United States is often considered part of Western civilization because most of its ties directly come from Europe. And a lot of its culture can be traced back there, so it gets to be included as part of Western civilization and Western culture. Eurocentrism plays a big role in the inherent privilege in the SCA that a lot of people experience, especially compared to New World personas, because since the SCA was really built with a Eurocentric view, it's a lot easier for people who have Eurocentric passions, those deriving from Europe, to play in the SCA compared to those who don't. It's problematic and it's exclusionary in really unexpected ways. Here's a good example I like to share. You know, the reliance on primarily English language or European resources for information on the New World often leads to a lot of problems. People who speak English are not always the best at denoting the history of people who did not speak English. Imagine that, you know, language barriers make it hard to communicate and hard to reliably chase things down. I do a lot of work on the Aztec Empire in classical Nahuatl. There are a couple editions of some major works in classical Nahuatl in English. One of them is considered a really good literal translation, but a really, really bad, like purposeful or meaningful translation. One of them is a lot better, but it's incomplete. However, there are really, really good resources in the Spanish because the Spanish were the first to communicate with the New World. They were the first people to write down. And if you know anything about classical Nahuatl was actually first written down in orthography in written script by the Spanish. So they helped basically invent the writing language, which meant that they had a hand in helping out with it being formalized, which means there's some really, really good resources as to translations from Nahuatl to Spanish. And there are really good mundane scholarly works in Spanish for classical Nahuatl. I read Spanish, so it's great. It's really good for me, but it's not always great for everyone else. And there are times where people have told me, well, yeah, but can't you give me an English language resource? And I'm like, yeah, but this one's better. Can't we just, can I just translate this one for you? And they're like, no, I'd rather see something in English that I can read. And, you know, that's a form of Eurocentrism creeping its way into the SCA when it comes to these kind of things. Oftentimes people try to justify it because of accessibility concerns, but you know, it ignores the accessibility concerns of those of us from those backgrounds that are not European, or those of us who have ties to those backgrounds that are not European. Historically speaking, the SCA has been really Eurocentric. It's been primarily based that way because that's the way it was built. Because it's been that way doesn't mean it has to be that way, though. A lot of the SCA is trying to move away from that and trying to be more incorporative of a whole world view in period play. However, a lot of our identities are really complicated. You know, for example, there are some of us like me who have ties to both places. You know, I know which parts of my family, or at least I know some parts of my family come from Spain. I know which parts of my family are indigenous and come from, or at least parts of my family, excuse me, that come from, you know, Mayan cultures in Central America. I have very complicated feelings about Eurocentrism because I'm a direct product of it, and I have ties to both ends. So, you know, I'm somewhere in between on the spectrum of being okay with it 100% or being not okay with it at all. And it's important to understand that everyone's perspectives are very valid. It's very valid for all of us that do these kind of New World New World personas and New World studies to have these very complicated feelings. It's a complicated issue. It's not simple. It's not cut and paste. So as long as we're open to the fact that everyone probably feels a little different about it, we can make some good progress on that. But we always have to remember that we need to move forward. That good, better, best. We want to be doing best. We want to be striving for best. Just because that's how it's always been in SCA does not mean that we want to keep it that way. We are very quickly running out of time, so I will do this one on allyship. The last one was just some examples, Eurocentrism.
We're under no necessary time restriction other than people might want to go to bed to go to work tomorrow. So
okay,
take all the time you personally need. I've got a license that lets me do 7-hour meetings if you really need to do that. Although you and me will be the only ones here.
All right. Well, I mean, part of it is my fault for starting a little bit late, so I do apologize. The last slide was just examples of Eurocentrism. We can talk about that at the end if people want to just have a little bit of a talking hour, or those that want to stay up and talk about it a little bit more. Let's move forward with a purposeful thing, which is allyship. This is the main thing that I think a lot of us are here for, is really learning about allyship. There's a really good concept called moral licensing, in which that we often give ourselves passes for negative actions because of our good actions. There's a fantastic experiment with recycling about this. So a bunch of participants were asked if they recycle. They were allowed to answer yes or no. And then they were told, okay, well, we need you to do some tasks. Wrap all these presents for us, throw all these things, like make some dinner for us and decide what you're going to do with the packaging and use whatever you want to make dinner. Make some calls and write down some notes for us. They were just asked to do all these mundane tasks that would accumulate garbage, because that's just our lives. We often accumulate garbage because we have a lot of disposable things that we purchase to do things. So one of the really interesting things they found out were that the people who said they recycled and were pretty convinced that they were going to recycle made the most trash. They made by far the most garbage. And they didn't always recycle all of it, or recycle any of it in some cases. Basically, the conclusion drawn was that they allowed themselves to act negatively to make garbage, because they felt that in the end their good actions would make up for it. I can make the most garbage because I'm going to recycle anyways. That was the attitude that was conveyed with that. Sometimes when we self-identify as an ally, we can act poorly, because we can be justifying our actions as saying, well, it's okay. I mean, I might have messed up a couple of times, but I'm an ally. I do good things. It's unfortunately not cut and dry like that, It's not a one-to-one scenario, and just because you might have done something to slight one person but made it up to another person makes it right. And I'm not saying that every example is that extreme, but one thing to keep in mind is that we do have a tendency to have this moral licensing. This is a repeatable experiment. Because of that, it's really important that we think of our allyship as meaningful and purposeful, and not just performative. And by performative allyship, I mean someone who does something with expectation of an award, of either being social clout, social capital, reputation, or someone who does these actions of allyship that are often just superficial and not very impactful. What comes to mind are Facebook profiles. Switching your profiles to Black Lives Matter is great. I'm glad that you're showing your support. What are you doing beyond that? And that's kind of what we talk about with performative allyship. Is it's really good that you want to do something, especially those of us who are and do these New World studies that are not very widely accepted, or that are just emergent, or that we're struggling to make a thing more. I'm glad that so many people are excited and want to help us out, and that's fantastic. But what are you doing about it? Are you petitioning your local groups? Are you creating resources? Are you helping us make connections? What are you directly doing to help? As opposed to just saying that, yeah, it's great. I'm really glad that you're doing this thing. Thumbs up. And that's kind of what we talk about with performative allyship. Again, I'm not meaning to call anyone out here, but I do want to be blunt about the terminology, because I think it's important for us to have that in mind. It's important for us to be aware of these things. So we are at the end, thankfully. So I went slightly over, started slightly late, so I think you're good. I'm going to run through some examples of what could possibly be good allyship, and then we'll just kind of take it back from there. We can openly talk for a bit. I will finally get through the chat, which has been I've seen out the corner of my screen has been going and going. So there's a lot of interesting things going on there. But let's talk about some ways that you can be a good ally. What are ways that you can go from being a performative ally to a directly influential ally? So one thing is, for example, speaking on behalf of others or over them. This is a bad ally thing. Good ally would be giving people platforms to speak for themselves. Expecting credit or recognition. Instead of doing that, why don't we try to recognize the uncredited emotional labor of others? You know, instead of expecting people to recognize us for being good allies, why don't we recognize people who have been doing the work and help lift them up, help give them some recognition as well? Okay, there we go. Sorry, went back too far. So instead of presenting superficially or performative with your support, actively work towards systematic issues and changes. You know, directly work at changing stuff for the bottom up. If somebody is having an issue in the new world playing a persona, don't just say, I support this person. Say, hey, why are you having problems playing this persona? What are things I can do to help you get your device registered? What are things I can do to help you get your name registered? What are things I can directly do personally that will help you feel included and that aren't just me saying, I support you, thumbs up, have a good time. You know, instead of trying to be the representation the new world needs, you know, kind of going back to that cultural appropriation thing, instead of trying to be a representative of the needs of the new world community, maybe include new world community members in leadership roles. Maybe give them positions to talk or speak for themselves. They don't need you to be the representation. They need representation themselves. On that note, though, don't just, instead of putting people from the New World community in roles just for representation's sake, actively seek out members of the community that are good at those roles or would like to grow in those roles. This is a tricky one because I often, like I said, it's kind of that diversity hire thing of, oh, well, that guy does a New World thing. Let's go ahead and, you know, let's make him a court baron because he does New World studies. There you go. Now we have a court baron that is an Aztec. Congratulations. We did a good job. No, let's look at people that have been doing this work for a while, because I often hear that, oh, I don't know anyone. What that says to me is that either you haven't looked hard enough or that you haven't asked the right people, because there's quite a big community of us that do these New World studies, and quite a few of us are talented in different ways. I mean, some of us focus on fighting, some of us focus on court stuff, and I focus on language and bardic. That's my special area of specialties. Kind of on that note, though, don't expect us to do everything. You know, I focus on language and bardic. I've had people reach out for me about costuming, and I'm like, I can tell you a little bit that I know, but that's not my area of specialties. You know, that's kind of part of this whole making sure that you are reaching out to people purposefully and not just because you need the minority opinion to weigh in and to justify whatever it is that you're looking at. Instead of cautioning others to wait to bring up concerns, maybe advocate for their voice to be heard. Make sure that you're not accidentally silencing them. Make sure that you are giving them platforms where they can speak up. And instead of defending problematic individuals because they have done a lot for the society, try respecting the concerns of the members that are speaking up against these problematic individuals and really address those matters at hand. I know that's tricky. I know this last one is tricky because this goes into a lot of politics, and especially when it comes to dealing with things in the SCA. But I can also tell you that from personal experience I've seen firsthand, one of the issues with people not speaking up about problematic individuals is they often feel like they're not going to be supported if they do so. And it's very important that, you know, we really hear out concerns when it comes to these kind of situations, whether it's a grave offense or not. You know, we really need to be hearing these voices and hearing out these concerns and figure out how we can address them. So the last bits I have were just some commentary and discussion points from New World Scadians. These are things that I have either heard on the grapevine, directly been privy to. I decided to not name any names because I don't want to put anyone's business out there. I take full responsibility for this being out in the open because that's what happens. That is my emotional labor for presenting it forward. But these are some things that I've heard said along in the New World sphere. You know, I often get frustrated that I'm asked to be an expert on everything New World or required to speak on behalf of everyone in my community. I often get frustrated that I'm not asked to comment on New World subjects or topics that I am personally involved in, and that I'm overlooked for those with less personal experience with the subject. I feel as though my form of play is only tolerated, not supported. I wish people understood that my persona is an important aspect of me exploring my own cultural background and not just a novelty or hobby. I didn't put it on here because it's actually a little tragic, but I've also heard people say that they intentionally don't want to play a New World persona even though they are indigenous because they try to escape the suffering they experience in their mundane life. And they get frustrated that people ask them for New World advice when they're trying to really separate themselves from that experience because of how hard it is to just live that way. While I appreciate what they're trying to do, I wish allies listened more and spoke less, or at least were a little bit more thoughtful about how they use their voices. I'm tired of being the token minority diversity hire. I really did not want this to come across as kind of a preachy lecture, and I really hope it didn't. But I do think it's important that we talk about these concerns as bluntly as possible. Sometimes, especially those of us who are minorities, often feel disenfranchised. And we often feel like we have to double speak or speak around the issue in order for it to be accepted. It was not my intention to be hurtful with anything, and I really hope I was being at least open and honest and trying to at least convey friendship and camaraderie, because I'm not here to lecture people. I'm here to work with people. But at the same token, I think it's important that we talk about these things bluntly, because we're often told to, maybe say that a little nicer. Maybe don't shake the boat. You're going to make too many enemies that way. And that's not always super helpful. I do feel it was very helpful to be here today, and I have no qualms about the emotional labor it took for me to be here. I'm glad, and I'm very happy that you all asked me to speak today, and I'm very glad that I had the audience I did, because I really feel that these are the steps we can take to make this better. I do feel that this is the only way we're going to accomplish change, is by bridging that gap and all these communities working together. Remember, cultural appropriation means you trying to represent one community, but there's nothing about supporting another community that's wrong. There's nothing appropriative about lending a hand to another community that needs your help. And that's one of the things that's the grand message I think I want to get across today, is that when we're purposeful with our allyship and we really do lend that hand properly, we can accomplish so much more. I mean, the SCA is already leaps and bounds better. I've only been playing for 2 years. It is leaps and bounds better in those 2 years. I mean, there's a mission statement that's now more accepting and more fulfilling. I've directly got to see people who were actively racist be kicked out of the SCA, which was not the case a couple of years ago. At least from my own personal experience, there's some stuff there's some significant change going on. I'm very glad, and I'm very happy to see those motions. But good, better, best. We're doing good. We're doing better. Let's shoot for that best. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all being here. If you have any questions, feel free to voice them now. I will try to get through that chat, but I saw that chat just going, so that's probably gonna get lost. So you're probably better off asking me personally. But thank you so much.
Tenoch, and I'm very aware right now that the camera is projecting me as the whitest person who has ever lived, so apologies about that. I don't know what's wrong with the camera. I look like a ghost. Tenoch, I just wanted to say on behalf of the Lions Den how much we appreciate that you came and spoke with us today and took the time and took the labor to spell things out. And I think it was wonderful. I think you cover a lot of really tough topics, and you did it in a way that was really approachable and very relevant. And I did actually have a question for you, if it's okay. I'm also speaking to you as a Laurel.
Of course.
Here in Ontario, and I've been playing here for many years, we do not have anybody who has an active New World persona that I'm aware of. We do have Indigenous players who I think might be toying with the idea of walking that path. As somebody who is active in the A&S community, I certainly want to encourage and celebrate their exploration of their ancestry if that's something they want to participate in. I'm a little bit apprehensive, and I think a few people are, about the door opening for people who are now non-Indigenous to, oh, that looks cool, like I want to do this persona, not being aware of colonial history, not being aware of attempted cultural genocide, and not being aware of these things. I kind of wanted to hear your views specifically of non-Indigenous people coming in with these, like what advice would you have for how we can get to a place where we can all celebrate our ancestry, and not have it be, triggering for others, or there's a lot of complexity there. I'm not sure even how to phrase the question.
No, I think I understand you perfectly, because you were asking the $1 million question. You're asking the great question that I think the SCA in general wrestles with, is how do we engage and celebrate cultures that aren't really our own? Because so many of us in the SCA really do things that are not our own culture, at least not from our own background distinctly. And so many of us participate in activities with other people who are not from our own cultural backgrounds distinctly. And, there's not an easy answer to that, because on the one hand, you don't want to ban people from things, because one of the best ways that we learn about other cultures is by participating in their activities. But on the other hand, you do want to make sure that we're respectful, that there are safe spaces, that people feel as if, they're not being steamrolled by others. It's challenging. It's very challenging. I think that this goes along with that slippery slope of like appreciation versus appropriation. Like where do you draw that line? Okay. Well, so I can't speak for everyone. I can say for me personally, I think that one of the things that would be super helpful is if we had more people that were involved in judging and involved in the actual circle processes that had experience and knowledge of this. And I understand that it's hard, especially for like the path to laurel is not easy. It's pretty long. It's pretty tedious. It's very unreasonable to expect there to be suddenly be new world laurels in every kingdom. That's just not something that's going to happen overnight, unfortunately. But I think that to start off with would be making sure that when someone shows an interest in there, really working with them distinctly and helping them grow. Because what happens then is once they grow in their area of expertise, they become a resource for other people. That's something that's happened to me personally. I do a lot of work in language. I am now working on creating a titling system in classical Nahuatl for the various titles in the SCA for the order of precedence. So that's something I'm personally working on that I really hope will be adopted and get to enter the corpora. I also get asked often, because people know that I do Aztec Empire stuff. I ask questions all the time about just various A&S stuff, because they're like, "Oh, you're an A&S person. You're a Kingdom Bard, so clearly you know something about A&S. I want to perform this piece, but I don't know how to pronounce it." And I'm like, "That's great. I teach a language class. I have language resources. Let me give you one of my handouts." I can do that now because I had a couple of years working towards it. When I first started SCA, I was not as confident in that. I'm very new. It's really tough. It was pulling teeth for a while, but I found some people that supported me and kept encouraging me to do it. And now I have expertise in the field, and I can help other people grow. I had someone tell me once that whether you like it or not, you're on laurel track already, because you have to argue and you have to be able to defend your point as a laurel would. Because you have to have developed that level of expertise in order to share that new knowledge. And I think that would be probably the advice I would give, is that if you see someone that really is interested in A&S, that does, New World Studies, Indigenous Studies, what have you, like really help them grow, because it's going to be hard for them to defend their point. But if they grow, they become an invaluable resource for other people. And then they get to be a resource for people that are non-Indigenous. And they get to help guide that process, because once again, it's not just my opinion, it's also their opinion as to how to handle that. I hope that's at least a little bit insightful.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really positive, forward-facing way to look at it. to help and support leadership from within the community. I think that's, yeah, awesome. That makes me feel, thank you. Thank you.
Very glad I was able to help. Anyone else, feel free to just chime in. I think we're just chatting at this point.
You had one of your comments was about other ways of playing, and that is actually a point that is true of all people, not just New World personas. The different ways of playing and the different barriers that people have had, that's a commonality that maybe we could address to find common ground.
That's a good point.
As a starting point.
Yeah, that's a good starting point.
Even if it's from a position of privilege.
Yeah, so when I talk about that, there's a concept. I didn't put it in the slide. I really should have. As you could see, this PowerPoint was jam-packed, and I was really struggling to keep it condensed. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was intersectionality. So intersectionality is a concept in which two groups of people have a common need, but one group of people is more disadvantaged than another group. So a good example, a very common example of intersectionality is Black women and non-Black women. So white women and Black women typically have similar needs. There is a need for progressive change for women, but Black women are more disenfranchised than white women are. And so it's not to say that the needs of white women aren't important, but Black women are more disenfranchised and oftentimes get more overlooked. So when I talk about uncommon personas or groups that aren't as respected in the SCA are not really as established as far as a New World perspective, I'm not saying that other groups aren't, because, for example, the Bardic community, I think, is underserved tremendously. It's a lot of work to be a bard. It's a lot of work to be a bard, to be a good bard too. And it's just kind of, it's lumped in with everything else in A&S. And it's not always as respected as other fields are, in my opinion. It's harder to do A&S competitions with Bardic. It's we have baronial and kingdom bards, but they're not really as respected as other positions. So
it's an ephemeral art.
Yeah,
it's there and then it's gone.
Right. So you have this art form, and I'm, like I said, I'm speaking from personal experience because I feel like I do that in this case. So you have Bardic, which I feel like is not as respected as other areas in the SCA. Now let's talk about New World Bardic, and let's talk about how accepted that is. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, it's a tough sell. People want to hear Bardic in English that they can get along with. People want to hear drinking songs or songs that remind them of the old times, or I'm just quoting Chumbawamba at this point in time, but we want Bardic that relates to us, and so it's really hard. It's a tough sell to have Bardic in other languages. I do a lot of foreign language Bardic. I will tell you, it's a tough sell. It is a tough sell just doing it in any foreign language, and then doing New World, which is why I made a point of winning our Kingdom Bardic by writing original works in classical Nahuatl and performing that in the Bardic. And it just so happened that our queen at the time was a Laurel and worked with all the Laurels and was really excited about the research I did in there. So, that worked well in my favor in that instance. But I performed that same piece in other circles, and it has gone flat. It has not been as well accepted.
That's why I don't perform necessarily in Bardic circles, because I do formal music. We'll go and play background music for feasts and such. That's a more appropriate use of the music I do. But no, I would not be considered horribly entertaining in a Bardic circle.
No, I totally understand. I was an instrumentalist before I was a vocalist, so I greatly understand. Like I said, talk about disparaged groups. Instrumentalists are basically servants that are expected to play for 4 hours for ball, and for some reason that just common courtesy of giving us snacks and water is beyond autocrats sometimes. For any of you that are autocrats here, if you ever have a ball, please take care of your musicians. Please.
I was a singer before I was an instrumentalist, so work in foreign languages as well. And so yes, I know, I feel your pain.
Yeah, so the point I was trying to make before we because my other passion is Bardic, so I could just make another hour about Bardic if we're being honest, and probably beyond that. The point I'm trying to make though is that we need to be mindful of the intersectionality when it comes to these kind of issues. And yeah, it's important to recognize that there are certain groups in the SCA that are just underserved. But, you know, we also need to be mindful that even within those groups, there are people that are even more so underserved, even more so disenfranchised. And if we're not being attentive to their wants, their needs, their own nurture and care, we're going to leave them behind, you know. And that's kind of what I was trying to get across. I was hoping that's what I could get across. I'm hoping that's, at least right now, I can maybe clarify that point a little bit. But that's something that we need to keep in mind and that is what I mean when I talk about underserved groups.
What I was actually bringing up is in 2004, my mother had a stroke, and that cut down on my SCA playing and my travel. And for, 14 and a half years that she survived, I wasn't playing that much. I was making a point of seeing something. So again, that was a barrier for me. And I know that there are other people who have those same barriers for whatever reason, for lack of funds, for distance, for mundane life intruding. Those barriers are real. And they, again, in terms of your intersectionality, it's a starting point that we can find, but some are impacted more by it than others.
I agree. No, I 100% agree with you in that. I have a chronic illness. I don't talk about it too much because it does literally halt my ability to play or do things. I had some very serious health issues. I almost passed away this summer. Had to get an emergency surgery for that, and it's actually affected everything. I can't even perform music currently because of there's a wrist brace on because of my own health issues at the time being, and it's very hard for me to do that. And so honestly, a lot of my focus now is working on. You very briefly saw my musician's health slide. I mundanely do music health research, and so I try to work on creating accessibility within the SCA for musicians, and talk about modifications and things that can be done. That's literally my career. That's what I do now, mundanely in the SCA, and that's one of those ways that I've reached that common ground, as you said. There are people from all aisles that are disabled, have disabilities, have chronic illness, regardless of your own background. And so it is a good starting point to have those discussions. But once we have those discussions, it's also good to bring in the next point. But you're right. That is a good place to start. That is a good place to start with.
I believe Aben Ibn Khalid has a question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, my name's Aban.
Hey.
Ibn Khalid. Y'all call me Aban. So I got a question regarding the foreign language bardic stuff. Did y'all ever have any drumming and did y'all ever involve any drumming, new old drumming in your bardic? Because I never got to hear any of the log drums or any of that cool Waitless stuff. I'd love to hear that. Did y'all ever get to involve that in your bardic? Bardic?
So I actually, one of my favorite pieces, okay, I guess self-advertisement at this point. I teach a class. I want to talk about a class I teach. So I teach a class on Aztec language. I also teach a class on Bardic in the New World, specifically Aztec Empire around 16th century, and talk about the combinations between Old World and New World music that were going on at the same time. How we had indigenous composers who were writing in the style of European composers because of the exposure, but they were introducing a lot of their own indigenous concepts. And one of the most prevalent things in pretty much any culture in the Americas at that time was percussion, just because every culture has some form of percussion heritage, and it was very important in the Aztec Empire, especially for ritual and for group worship. And so I actually do a piece that I incorporate a rhythm that was documented in what's called the Cantatas Mexicanas, which is a period document of spoken word song written in classical Nahuatl, and then a few of the pieces actually have notations that would suggest drumming rhythms. And because those drums still exist, we can work off of that and make an assumption of what the rhythm would have been like. And so I have a piece where I have kind of incorporated that into it. And so I do some of those pieces occasionally, but it is one of those things where you kind of have a time and place. One of the best and simultaneously best and worst pieces of advice I ever got about Bardic is it's really up to your audience. You really have to have the audience for it. If your audience is not interested in hearing foreign language Bardic, they're not going to be receptive to it. If your audience is super thrilled about it, then yeah, it's really good to do. But it's a good piece of advice because it helps you kind of gauge the interest of other people. It's also a bad piece of advice it's a bad piece of advice in the sense that it kind of discourages people from trying stuff that's new. And that can be a little bit challenging at times. But I have done some foreign language Bardic. You've been in some circles, I think, where I have done Nawat Bardic with and what have you. I don't have a wet, so I don't have a log drum with me. But I have shown people. I have a wooden cajon that I replicate the sound with. Unfortunately, wet is out of my budget currently. But eventually, maybe someday I'll get the proper drum. If I get the proper drum and can record myself doing so, I'll make sure to let you know.
Thanks, because I'd love to hear some proper Aztec drumming, like the log drum and that big old drum, the Huitla and the Tepanatsli or Tepanat. Sorry.
No, you got it pretty close.
Oh, Tepanats.
Natsli.
Natsli and the Huit.
And the wet, yeah.
Huit. Those are cool percussion and Ngahua is like interesting language, I swear. And also regarding that, not feeding your like musicians and stuff properly, or if at all, has that actually ever happened in balls and stuff? Because that's probably not good. Like, has that ever happened like in balls or like at events and stuff?
So speaking as someone who plays in a lot of balls, there's usually a set list that people want to hear because there's dances based off that list. So there's not really like a lot of room for free form interpretation of music. And by not a lot of room, I mean less than what room even exists. Because you have people that are mad if you don't play the piece the exact way they want to hear it.
Yeah, even ornamentation could be frowned upon in some establishments.
Yeah. Now you get people that are upset because you're taking it at the wrong pace. And you're like, but this is a pace that's always been. Well, it's not the pace I want it at. Please play it at this pace. And you're just like, okay, cool. Well, I'm glad I volunteered 3 hours of my weekend and free labor to talk about emotional labor. Oh boy, is there a lot of emotional labor being an instrumentalist? And yes, seriously, autocrats, feed your instrumentalists.
Oh my God, yes.
Oh God, yeah, no, it's. I mean, we want to talk about how disparaged Bardic is in general, instrumentalists even more so, because of the amount of skill and time it takes to be an instrumentalist, and then to basically be shoved into a corner and told that you're either not playing loud enough or fast enough. Yeah, it's a tough sell. It's a tough sell.
And then that the corner is like 6.5 feet too small for the number of musicians that you actually have, or the needs of their arm.
Right. I love because I was a violinist primarily.
And cold and drafty.
Yeah. And the chairs are bad if there are chairs. Sometimes you're expected to just summon a chair out of nowhere.
I bring my own. I bring my stands. I bring my stand lights. I bring my extension cord. I don't count on anything being supplied.
Yeah.
Yes,
no,
this cellist showed up to an event and they were like, I thought the cello was played standing up. Sorry. And I'm like, I see. Good. Good performance we will have.
Oh, man.
When I was at when I was at my dance band, we actually when I was at War of the Wings, we were part of a dance band. I'm part of a dance band called the Atlantean Dance Band. We actually had chairs with us, but they were quite uncomfortable. Not to mention, we weren't playing like properly outside, and where we were forced in we didn't have any, and the worst part is there was dust and crap and dirt all over. We did not have any wet dirt, staying wet. Well, so we also had to deal with a dust cloud throughout the whole dang thing, and it was raining all over.
Gosh.
It was like raining. We got rained out. At least we got rained out outside, and the barn was the only good place inside. Not to mention, there was no hafla at the end either because we got rained out of that.
I just want to point out that you're talking to Antir.
Oh, sorry.
Rain is normal here.
I'm in Ontario where it's, you know, a humid swamp. I'm specifically in Stargate, which is Houston area, which is just a swamp 24/7. Yeah. And so it's either extremely hot and damp in the air, or it's raining and, you know, soaking in the air, which is great because I used to work as a luthier technician. So I used to work on wooden instruments, and then to go to work and then work on instruments and repair them, and then go out on the weekend to these terrible environments where, like, I would literally be complaining about the exact people there taking their instruments to that environment, and then show up at work to see them bring in their instruments for repair jobs. Yeah, it was don't recommend to anyone. No, there's those of you who are not musicians in our group, please feed and take care of your musicians. Please do so, because
they will want our music.
Yeah, because they will want to come back. They will, if you take care of them, they will want to come back. In Ontario we have War of the Rams, which is like a 3 kingdom event. It used to be called BAM, now it's called War of the Rams. That was my first major event I ever went to, like when I first joined the SCA. And when I first joined the SCA, I started playing in a Hafla group, because I love it. It's like my favorite thing to do, and it was so much fun. And the encampment we had was fantastic. They had a potluck for the musicians beforehand, and during the event they brought us drink, and they brought us food, and they brought us whatever we wanted. They made a show of paying us tokens in the event, because they wanted to, you know, they're like, this is part of Hafla culture, is making sure the musicians get paid, because they're not servants, they're participants, and they made a big spectacle of doing that during the event. It was great. I loved it. A month later I played a ball, and I got scolded because I wasn't playing loud enough at a song I'd never seen before and was expected to sight read on the spot. Like,
wow,
it was a bit of a night and day difference, and that's kind of like, you know, I may not want to play in that ball again, but I will definitely play that Hafla again, because I absolutely will pay for free pomegranate juice every half hour. That was great. No, take care of your musicians and they'll come back.
Sight read things on a recorder that were meant for strings, and don't sit very well at speed. Yes.
I love being told to sight read alto clef on my violin. It's great. It's fun.
Which event was that? Because I'm in Bjorn's version. I don't remember. But then again, I don't have an instrument right now.
We're being recorded. I'm not going to say names.
Fair enough.
That's fair.
I missed that. Obviously, I shouldn't have.
I want to say, for the most part, the ball community on Sea is very tight. Like, they all know each other pretty well, and they do a pretty good job of supporting each other, and they understand, like, you know, if you can't play, drop in and drop out. Of course, we also have Master Avatar, who can carry the entire section on his own and reminds us kindly about that. But yeah, so the ball community is really close. But I've been to some events where I'm like, really, autocrats, like, you got to do better for your musicians. You really need to take care of your musicians. We're not wind-up monkeys that can just go without any forewarning. You know, give us that ball list ahead of time. You know, make sure that we have some comfy seats and that we have a space to set up, and we're not just kind of forced to figure our own arrangement out. Like, you know, just really take care of musicians and they'll come. Which kind of ties into the whole New World thing. Is, you know, if you make a space for people that want to play in the New World, they'll come, but you got to make that space for them. You really gotta make that space for them.
Not to mention, you're gonna need us to at least let us have the food. Let us have free food too. You know, right?
I will definitely play for a day board. I'll definitely play for a couple hours if I get that meat and cheese board. I'm very simple man.
I just wanted to make a comment back on the original topic, if I may.
Yes, please. I'm glad that we are circling back to the purpose we're here for.
So you had mentioned before that there are a lot of indigenous players who might not want to represent their culture. And that kind of made me think of my own experience to a degree. Being a convert to Islam, I portray 15th century Irish. And I remember getting a lot of weird looks from different people when I started. They're like, "Oh, are you going to be Persian? Are you going to be Middle Eastern?" And I'm like, "No, I'm Irish." And for me, it was the exploring my own roots, my own culture. But at the same time, I think other people just looked at the headscarf and were like, "Oh, but it would be so much easier if you were just Persian." And I think it's important that we need to not make assumptions, especially when people are coming in who may look in some way, shape, or form different than the bulk of the community as to, it's their choice of who we're going to portray. And for some of us, that reasoning is very personal. We get very attached to our personas. I mean, I've been building mine for 15 years, and I've had to tweak it now and again, but it's personal. And, we need to make sure that we don't assume that just because someone looks a certain way that they have to be locked into that particular persona.
And over time, some of us change. I am not the 17-year-old I was when I joined the society.
And even within your own focus, even if you pick a persona, your interests grow and mature.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about knowledge is that the more you learn about something, the better you start doing it. I can tell you, for example, my name. So the title, Teuctli. So Teuctli means Lord in classical Nahuatl. That's actually not the first term I used for Lord, because there's so little resources for those of us on the SCA who want to use terminology from classical Nahuatl to refer to our precedents and our titles there. I actually had to do my own research. And one of the things about classical Nahuatl is, funny thing about a language that was written down by people that don't speak it, you get a lot of weird spellings and a lot of things that don't agree. And so actually I first used Teuctli because I thought that was going to be the more appropriate one. And then I started seeing that more often Teuctli was used instead of Teuctli, suggesting that perhaps people wrote it down improperly the first time and that the other one was more correct. It's still debatable, but I saw more references to Teuctli, so I went Teuctli. And then, even then, as I was learning classical Nahuatl and improving my own diction, I was mispronouncing it because at first I was saying Teuctli, and Teuctli is actually, Teuk is one syllable as opposed to two. So I was even then improving my own knowledge and my own persona there, and that's an important thing to do. I mean, I'm not ashamed that I'm improving my classical Nahuatl. I would be more ashamed if I wasn't improving my own language skills and my own study skills as I keep playing. But to kind of tie that in, that's that's one thing that's really personal to me. But kind of going back to the original point that was being made, there's oftentimes assumptions that you're going to be doing a certain thing. I am mundanely mestizo. I am mundanely Mexican American. I am mundanely Chicano. Therefore, it's an easy transition for me to do these Aztec Empire Spanish world studies. I also really, really love playing in Hafla. I love playing in Hafla. One of my uncles is Persian, and I love asking him so much about Middle Eastern music. And whenever there's a new Hafla piece I learn about, I ask him about it and like, oh, did you ever hear this? And like, how did you hear it play? And I'll ask him for advice. One of my favorite things I did was I actually asked him to teach us a Farsi happy birthday song for somebody for an event. For the leader of the Middle Eastern encampment. And that's a primary resource, which, remember, I told you, if you're gonna do something in a different culture, make sure you get those primary resources. But also, he doesn't speak for the whole community, so make sure you corroborate with other people. Other people in our Hafla group happen to have studied or study with people from various Arabic, Middle Eastern backgrounds. So we had enough resources between all of us to say, okay, this is probably a good way to do this. Even then, I think we could have probably done better, but it's really important you do those primary resources. But anyways, yeah, so I other interests besides Mesoamerican studies. But people just like to pigeonhole you as like, oh, you're the Aztec boy. And I'm like, well, okay, first of all, I'm like 30. I'm not like a boy. And then like, secondly, like, you know, I don't have to just do that. Like, I don't have to just do the one thing. No one in the SCA just does the one thing. There are some people that do. I guess I'm misspeaking. There are people that do just the one thing. But even when they do just the one thing, they do like 70 versions of just that one thing. It's so rare that you get people that hyper focus in one specific thing, and to expect people to do so is it's a little unreasonable, and it's just not very fair to just kind of assume what someone's going to do. Just because it'll be easier for them. I've had people tell me, you know, like other people that have that kind of mixed race identity that I have, that tell me that, you know, they went Spanish instead of Mesoamerican because they were told it was easier for them. You know, that's just kind of the shame with that.
I totally agree with that. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm just rambling.
Well, I'm indigenous for those in here that don't know. And I am also mixed race. My dad has mostly Germanic, Irish kind of background. But I know for myself, especially when I started in the SCA, I specifically went Italian because the clothes were pretty. And it wasn't even a thought that crossed my mind that an indigenous persona was even a possibility. But B, I kind of later on was like, yeah, I'd like to just leave all the issues of being indigenous at home. I don't need to talk about that here. And then, you know, five plus years later, I'm like, actually, you know what? An indigenous persona might be really cool. What would that look like for me and stuff? But
run it as an alternate.
That's
that's the other point I was going to make.
Yeah.
You know,
that's what my hubby and I have talked about, because my husband's also Cree from northern Alberta, and we've discussed having indigenous personas and stuff like that, and what that would look like for the both of us. And yeah, it would probably be like an alternate, but not a permanent kind of a thing for us. But
you know,
everyone's different.
For such a flexible thing, there seems to be such an assumption about hard and fast rules about personas, considering that people just like pick them up and drop them at like on the whim. You know, I've seen so many people who have just developed a whole new persona just for one event. And by whole persona, I mean they've got new garb, they have a new name, they've practiced new bardic pieces just for that one event. They've created a whole new identity. And like no one ever gives them crap about that. And you know, so I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do clearly, but I think that that's a totally valid way to play. Like I said, we all have different experiences. Because even myself, like I'm Chicano. I mean, I'm partially indigenous, but I'm not even indigenous in the way that we typically think of indigenous. You know, I'm not. I would not be considered part of that American Indian First Nations group that usually identifies as being more from Northern America. Since most of my family's from South America, or sorry, Central America, not the northern part of America. America's geography is really weird. But anyways, sorry, it's actually quite late over here, so I am extra rambly. But you know, everyone has a different way of wanting to play, and they're all valid. Every indigenous person has a very valid viewpoint because it's their viewpoint. It's not less valid because it's not the common viewpoint. And so glad that you came and you spoke up about that. Do you this may be like non-kosher, but do you want to like touch upon anything that I said and maybe share your own perspectives of anything else that I might have talked about that you either disagreed with or agreed with, or you know?
For sure. I agreed with everything that you said, and a lot of it was not necessarily new to me, but I think that's because I am indigenous, so I deal with that on the regular just because of who I am. But one of the things that I actually had a question about was in the development, I guess, of your persona in the SCA, have you used anything like traditional knowledge, or have you always had to have a backup for that written down?
Oh, okay. So this is a tough one because, so those of you who don't do Indigenous and New World studies probably have not come across this as much as us. But because a lot of New World culture was, for the most part, primarily oral, it's really hard for us to find documentation. And while there are people that still live to this day who are carriers of that oral tradition because that's how important it was, we're often not really allowed to use those because it's not a written documented source. It's still considered a word of mouth. And so it's a really hard thing for us. I know that for me personally, it is challenging because there's certain things I've heard that I had certain assumptions about. And then the more I did research, I'm like, oh, that's not as correct as I would have thought it was. Or that is a less period than I assumed it would be, or what have you. A good example is there's a lullaby. There's a Nahuatl lullaby called Macochipitlesin, and it's a very nice lullaby. It was very simple. It had like maybe 7 or 8 words, and really like most of them were just variations of the same word, and it was very repetitive. And since I was like very new to doing bardic in classical Nahuatl, I was like, okay, I'm going to learn the song first. Like, this is a good, easy song to learn. And it's a common lullaby. I mean, I've heard people sing it before. I briefly talked about the fact that I worked in immigration. So I used to work with children in immigration, and I've heard children sing it. So I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I was humming it to myself one time at work, and one of the kids was like, oh, and they started singing along. So it was great. It was like, oh, this is really cool and really fun. And like, this is an easy way for me to do something that is New World related, but you know, not too far reaching yet. Like we're just kind of skimming the surface, trying to get back in, trying to suss out what is going to be my challenges. So I learned the song. I did it repeatedly. I cannot find any period documentation for it at all. 0% period documentation. I'm pretty sure it's in classical Nahuatl because based on how Nahuatl has evolved over time, it's at least, if not period, it's like what's considered basically New World Renaissance, because unification in the New World doesn't happen until like 1650. That's another thing. We have those of us who do New World studies have some big issues with the cutoff point because it is not very fair to us. But anyways.
You mean the 1600 cutoff point?
Yeah, the 1600 cutoff point. We have some serious opinions about that because for most of us, like the actual cutoff of like the end of Renaissance period isn't until like 1650 or what have you. But anyways,
sometimes some places it's as early as 1580.
Yeah, it's a
speaking.
Yeah, it's I know that various other groups have that. I have a friend who specializes in Ladino studies, and she has some very strong opinions about the cutoff date too.
I think that goes to your slide about justice.
Yeah.
And it goes to the concept of what can the A&S community do to be more welcoming to research in the New World. And like there's some of us at least that feel it makes more sense to do pre-contact as a cutoff because like 1600 is it's just so Procrustean. It makes no sense.
Yeah,
the idea of the 1600 is okay. Then guns come on the scene in Europe and change everything. It's like,
and even then, like some of the justifications are kind of weak. Like I often hear that they try to do 1600 because it prevents the age of sail, but like Spain and Portugal have been very much active in. They basically start the age of sail.
Well, we lived in South Africa for 4 years. I can tell you that Portugal was there in 1450.
Yeah,
so. Anyway,
yeah, no, we can. This is one of those other like rabbit hole discussions, but
I do think I just want to make this clear. I do think in terms of oral history and oral traditions that the A&S community we could get together, Laurel could get together and be like, we are going to have more Indigenous personas and Indigenous research. How can we be more supportive, and how can we lay out very clear supportive ways in the same way that academia has now done as they decolonize their systems.
Right, because even writing systems.
Bit of my pet peeve, I guess. But yeah.
Oh no, I'm with you on this one. Writing systems are.
We need to decolonize A&S. God damn it.
So classical Nahuatl doesn't get written down until. Oh, I mean, I'm all here for this. Really, I am. Gosh.
We got a Facebook group, decolonizing A&S. Make a note.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna have to look at that one.
Even Gaelic was not really a written tradition, right?
My
How do you
language wasn't written
source?
down till the 1800s.
Yep. So classical Nawa
Never knew the
it
colonizer.
starts in 1500s. Like you start seeing it written. It isn't solidified and unified. The first evidence of like an official classical Nawa with 0 changes moving forward is like 1800.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have centuries of them making
I get
revisions
that.
to the language.
So how do you source then for like oral tradition?
How do you? Well, it comes down for me, anyways. Some of the oral tradition comes down through my grandparents, but a lot of indigenous cultures will have what are called knowledge keepers, and knowledge keepers are like the library of your nation. They have, and they're taught usually. If we're talking in an uncolonized sense, this is again kind of specific to my area, and I'm in BC, so keep that in mind. I don't know how it is with other indigenous cultures, but a knowledge keeper would often be taught from a very young age all of their culture's stories, their histories, their relationships with neighboring nations, how they operate. So it's a very respected position within a nation, and there's a very few of them in the nations around me left. Like the Shuswap Nation, which is where I live, has maybe 1 or 2. But for me personally, I would seek out a knowledge keeper within my area for certain types of information.
Is that accepted within like the A&S community in terms of what the SCA requires for names and stuff? My daughter, for example, she's portraying an 8th century Arab, and her name is, I mean, I'm not sure how I would find the written documentation because everything is written after the fact. But her name goes back to 600.
Yeah, that's like my name. So my name, I have it as Savia on my board, but my name is Teuctli, and that's a name that's passed down generation to generation, kind of like an heirloom is. But like, again, it wasn't written down until maybe the 1800s. And even then, like that was my great grandmother's name, but instead of calling her Teuctli, they called her Mary, right? So colonization kind of comes into play with some of the traditional knowledge, at least in Canada. But yeah,
so they're primary sources, and I think we all know like the oral traditions have these primary sources. But in terms of like, say you're in an A&S competition or you're submitting your name, what is the organization even accept in terms of that?
Well, I think that's what Her Grace was trying to get at when she was talking about like finding ways to, as an A&S community, to get together to address that, and that's I think she has a good point about that's going to be that's going to be one of the next big hurdles moving forward, as well as I feel like that's one of the ways that the SCA is going to have to evolve, whether it likes it or not, because we are knowing better, and now it's time for us to do better. And one of the things about that is starting to really accept other forms of resources that were not super common. I know people that were telling me that back in the day you weren't allowed to use internet resources in A&S competitions. They specifically had to be books or written articles. If you were using internet resources, they would not be accepted. And that's still a touchy point for some people, I know, but that's becoming less so of a point in that, we're kind of just changing with the mundane world. We now have so much more information available to us, and we're adapting as we see fit. And that's kind of one of the things I think is going to have to happen, especially in the sense of oral traditions, because oral traditions are more and more in danger. Actually, there's a huge issue with oral traditions being in trouble. My own personal that I can talk about with that is, I was recently talking to someone who's Mi'kmaq, and they're talking about their own experience with the language, because I found a piece in their language, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I want to learn this language, not because I want to represent it, but because I like learning languages, and I think it'd be really fun to learn some other like indigenous languages, and let me seek out someone who can like maybe teach me this. So I reached out to a friend who knows everybody. Like I have a friend in the SCA who knows literally everyone. It's because they played all over the freaking globe. And I'm not exaggerating. They literally played on every continent. But they know everybody. So because they know everybody, of course they knew someone who was Mi'kmaq.
We know Mary Grace too.
Oh, I was talking about Hextilda. Hextilda's ours in Unciora. Hex knows bloody everyone. Like there's hardly anybody that doesn't know Hex. But anyways,
knows Mary Grace too.
they probably know each other. They probably had lunch together a couple of times, like in Dragon Ball, because of course they did.
I literally thought of Hex when you said the person who knows everyone.
Oh yeah, no, I was specifically talking. I'm trying to not name drop so much because we're being recorded, but I don't think they'll mind if I mention them. Yeah, so they know everybody.
No one will see it. No one will see it. It'll be fine.
Yeah. So I reached out to them and I was like, hey, do you know someone who speaks Mi'kmaq? Because I kind of want to learn a little bit more about this language and not just like butcher it on my own. And so they reached out to some of their Mi'kmaq friends. And for one, they're going through some very difficult times. I'm sure those of you in Canada are aware of. But
looking up a little bit these days.
Yeah, it's starting to get a little better, but they're going through some tough times. But so she got in contact with her friend. They went back and forth for a while, talked to a few people, and she came back to me and said, actually, she doesn't speak the language. And she doesn't know many people that do speak the language. And one of the reasons why you found a song that was in the language is because there's an initiative by the people that still speak the indigenous tongue to spread the indigenous tongue and to try to get as many people as possible speaking it. Mm-hmm. And that was a little harrowing to know that, to be able to actually kind of have a personal experience where I'm witnessing what's possibly language extinction. And like it was a very real. This is a real thing. This is like it was like oh my gosh, this is happening. This is a thing. Oh my god, like I'm actually witnessing it firsthand, and I'm witnessing people's efforts to try to preserve it, and that's how I got drawn into the circle in the first place. Yeah, so like it's the more we move forward, the more we're gonna have to realize that we have to use the resources available to us. Our own cultures are not eternal. The culture you have now is not going to exist forever. It will possibly be radically different within the next few decades or centuries or what have you. And for that reason, we take advantage of the resources we have to preserve things. We are fortunate because we live in a day and age where we have computers and we have recording devices, and we can literally record ourselves saying the words out loud to other people so people can hear in our own voices. But other cultures didn't always have that. And I think we kind of need to respect the fact that cultures work differently. It was not always viable to make paper. And also, early paper kind of sucked, honestly. There's so many resources that just don't exist anymore because early paper sucked. Or because it was very easily destroyed or what have you. Gosh, I have a sticking point about that one.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no. Oh, well, you can go ahead. I was just going to ramble about more stuff about the Aztec Empire, but go on.
Oh, sorry.
One thing I wanted to point out, but sorry, you go. Oh, wait.
Oh, sorry. Regarding the drums, you gotta have that Aztec drumming class again, because I really like those drums. They're very cool. I've never seen them in person, and I love to learn the rhythms and stuff.
I will guarantee that I'll probably teach that in some future. I actually did teach it for kids a little while ago, and that was a lot of fun. And I think that's definitely going to be one of the ones I have in my back pocket if a minister of children ever asks for anyone that volunteer for children's classes, because that was a lot of fun. The kids seem to like it. I have some, as you can see, I have some stuff I'm working on. So I fortunately get to see a physical therapist soon and a rehab therapist. So hopefully I can get back to playing music a lot more myself. So I don't think I'll be giving an advanced class anytime soon. But I might be giving one, so you can keep an eye out for that. And
or at least the equivalent of choosing a new world instrument. That'd be very cool. At least have that.
That's a tough one. That's a rabbit hole there. Because remember, New World is a whole swath of people. We're talking about thousands of cultures when you say New World.
Sorry, I meant choosing more of an Aztec Empire, like instruments to the Aztec Empire at least, or at least.
You could probably say that instruments that were common in the Aztec Empire. Like I said, even when I talk about Aztec Empire, I always talk about, in my own presentations, I always make sure to specifically say, I am speaking about the Mexica people. I am not speaking about all of the Aztec Empire. I'm speaking about the things that were documented by the Mexica people, because they were the dominant culture and they wrote the most, and they are the safest ones to reference, at least in the scope of how we do referencing and documentation in the SCA. Because, and this actually brings me back to the point I was going to ramble out earlier, was Tenochcacuicatl, when a part of that Triple State Alliance that I briefly mentioned in the Aztec Empire, it was actually the head of it was basically considered the Athens of the Aztec Empire. And it had a great library with a bunch of resources that all got destroyed by the Spanish. So, you know, you want to talk about documentation and how we need documentation, and not gonna lie, sometimes I feel robbed. Sometimes I feel like there's a stacked house against me and there's nothing I can do about it. You know,
what they couldn't destroy, they buried.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I love it. I love it so much. Love all these barriers to play. So fun. Oh gosh, Savvy, I think you had a point you were gonna make, right?
Yeah, it was kind of going back to some of the documentation stuff. I mentioned knowledge keepers, but something that I wanted to mention as well is I know some of you might be familiar with the Wet'suwet'en Nation. A lot of their ways of keeping knowledge is actually passed down through song. So it's not, it's still an oral tradition, but it's not oral in the sense that most people think of like telling a story. They actually have a lot of their history and a lot of their nation's knowledge tied in with music. So it's passed down through songs to people, and songs are also really sacred in the sense that you do kind of have ownership of a song. It's not something that just anybody can sing. It's not something that just anybody can learn and teach. You have to have express permission from the person who has the song. But again, that goes back to like, this is our history, this is our nation's culture and everything like that, which I think is super cool and interesting. And one more thing tied into things with like language and storytelling is I think people forget that a culture's language greatly influences the way that those people think. And if you only speak one language, it's kind of hard to get that, I think. But if you're learning another language or you know a second language, you might understand how, my language doesn't have a word for black and white and two opposites. Like that didn't exist in my culture's language at all. We didn't have those opposing kind of ideologies. Everything was one, everything was connected, everything was fluid. And everything was also spoken of in terms of animate things. There was no such thing as inanimate things within my language, which again influences the way you talk about things, and also I think influences some of your documentation. But
I feel I feel that in my soul. You have no idea how much I feel that in my, oh my gosh, growing up bilingual, you have no idea how much I feel. There are certain things I can't express in English or can't express in Spanish because they're exclusive to being of one side or the other. I brought up like a really simple one. I brought up the term estadounidense. So estadounidense means someone from the U.S. We don't have a term in English for a U.S. like we don't have like the way you would say British or Colombian or Spanish. You don't have like USian. You could say U.S. citizen, but usually we say American for like the U.S.
Like they're claiming the entire pair of continents.
Which in Spanish that refers to all of the Americas. You don't say like Americano, like for the U.S. You say estadounidense. You say you're from the United States. And it's such a weird thing to say, like to have to code switch, depending on if I'm speaking Spanish or English, to think like, oh, that's right. Like I have a word for this in this language, but not a word for this in this language. I
see that issue a lot with my grandmother because I'm relearning our language, so I don't know it and I'm not fluent in it, but I'm relearning with my grandmother. And there's lots of times where I'll ask her, be like, hey, do we have a word for this thing? And she's like, nope, doesn't exist. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she's just like, and then sometimes she'll try and translate something else for us, and she's like, I don't know how it is in English. And she ends up describing more of a feeling or a general situation. And it's this big round thing that you can't put an English word to it.
What language, Savia?
The language is Teuctli from the Teuctli territory. So just around neighbors to the Shuswap Nation.
That is so cool. No, I feel that so much in my soul that describing around something, one of the things I am a little devious because, I briefly talked about the Cantares Mexicanos and how there are translations that are in English that are that are good literal translations, but not good meaningful translations. They don't really convey the same meaning. And I incorporated it into my kids' class because I thought, you know what? It's important that kids understand that the resources available are not always the best resources. Yeah. And I was teaching to the kids' class, and I taught them, hey, so how many of you speak foreign languages or speak a second language at all? And one of them was like, oh, I speak a little bit of Arabic, and one of them said that, oh, I speak some sign language. And I was like, okay, well, how hard is it to translate things sometimes? Do they translate exactly between the two languages? And they go, oh no, it's not always the same. You have to change it sometimes, or the meaning gets lost. Yeah. And I'm like, exactly. That happens too when you're translating languages from indigenous languages to a more easily understood tongue. And the thing about English is that English is one of my favorite quotes about English is that it's a mongrel of a language.
It is.
It just gathered things for centuries and then became a solidified language somehow that we for some reason think can't change anymore. That's like a common thought in English, is that it's not allowed to change. It's set in stone. It's always been this way, completely ignoring the fact that English has never always been one certain way. English has always changed and adapted over time. And we've kind of reached a point where we don't think English can adopt or change anymore. And so because of that, it's getting more and more difficult to translate things. In a way that's like I said, more meaningful and purposeful translations as opposed to just direct literal translations.
Bringing up a rabbit hole here, it has been said that Latin didn't officially die until the Renaissance, when they tried to push it back to what it was originally, because it had been evolving. And when they tried to make it go back to classical Latin, it killed it.
Yep, that's the thing about classical languages. They stunt they don't just stunt the growth of language, they kind of erase it. So Nahuatl is an existing language. It's not extinct. There are over 1.5 million native Nahuatl speakers. There's a region in Mexico called Huasteca. So there's Mexico has states basically like the U.S. does. So the Huastec region, Huasteca, they have over 1 million native Nahuatl speakers, to the point where the government actually has things in not classical Nahuatl, it's called Huasteca Nahuatl, but it has active documents and systems for Nahuatl speakers there. And the government in Mexico is doing a really big push to celebrate indigenous languages. So they're encouraging the study of classical Nahuatl amongst their students as a second language in schools or in the university and what have you. And there is a very big fear that study of classical Nahuatl, it is just different enough from Huasteca Nahuatl that it can cause problems with preserving that dialect. And there is an argument to be made about well, they're speaking the truer dialect as opposed to the more colonially influenced Huasteca dialect, but that's not even true there, because it was written down by the Spanish. So there's bad justifications all the way around. Language. This is Bardic and language, and these are two things I can just talk about forever. Oh God.
Please do.
What's funny too, I really related
to hear more of this.
Yeah. I have like I said, I teach an intro to Aztec language, or intro to classical Nahuatl. It's called Aztec language 101 because people won't get it otherwise. But then I specify classical Nahuatl afterwards, that is intro to classical Nahuatl. And I have never once finished that class. The material I always have, I always go over because people bring up questions and then we go on tangents. And the last time I taught it, we talked for like 15-20 minutes before I even started the presentation, just because I was answering questions people had, and I was like, yeah, it's so exciting to have people engaged in this. I'd just rather do this than give you like a rote lecture.
But that's an amazing class. That's honestly one of the best classes I've ever taken in the SCA. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate
Same
it.
here. I think I may have attended that class.
Yeah, you did. You did attend that class. You were there when I was talking for like 15 minutes without like stopping.
Oh yeah, I did attend it. Thanks for having that class, by the way.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and it was nice to be able to teach in other places. Gosh, I can't tell if it's maybe the fact that the grass is always greener on the other side, but I always feel like I get more people interested in my things and my pet projects in other kingdoms. And it's not fair to say, because I have had, especially lately, I've had a lot more interest in Onsteora. And it's just, I think maybe the opportunities to teach have been less so than in other kingdoms. But, you know, I always get really excited when I get someone from another kingdom who asks me to teach, especially right now during the virtual SCA age. I mean, when people like reach out to me about talking about my Aztec stuff, because I'm like, yeah, like I'll totally do it. I love it. I have like 12 classes in the background. Let me just try to pick the 2 that I can teach, because you have a time limit and you're only letting people sign up for 2 or 3 of them. So yeah, there's always that like grass is the greener on the other side, because you're like, oh, like other people appreciate me in other places. And then I'll teach in Onsteora and I'm like, oh no, like people here appreciate me too. I'm just being like idealistic because people in other places are excited about me.
I think it's different in other kingdoms though, because you can kind of ignore the less fun aspects because you're going there more to play than you are to do stuff. Draven and I get that a lot when we travel to Avacal. We're like, we love it here, it's the greatest, and then we're like, well, our kingdom's pretty damn awesome too. It's just we get to see all the not fun stuff behind the event.
Yeah, when you know how the pudding is made, you have your misgivings and your personal feelings and whatever. But when you go to somewhere else, you're just a guest, so you don't have to worry about all the drama and politics.
Yeah. Instead of actually doing the work and behind the scenes
Right.
and like cooking the feast and cleaning and all that.
Loved going to a Strata War. I never had to sit gate.
I've never
No,
been
sorry,
to
you're not a member of
any
this kingdom.
other
You
war.
can't.
That's
I've never
yeah. So
been to any other war besides War of the Wings, and I still want to go back. And I want
Especially-
to attend other wars.
Gosh. So especially now that we're doing all this virtual stuff, and there's been so many virtual Kingdom Bardics, and I am a Kingdom Bard, I've been trying to attend as many as possible to just kind of, and I've met a lot of other Kingdom Bards and stuff, and it's been a lot of fun and great. But one of my favorite things is just kind of seeing the different culture, like the different attitudes people have in different kingdoms, and just how everything is always familiar enough to not make you feel out of place, but always slightly different enough to trip you up. And make you think like, oh, okay, so they are slightly different. They are like those weird distant cousins who speak the same language, but like for some reason put like grape jelly instead of strawberry jelly on the toast or whatever. That's because I mean, like I'll go to Bardic competitions where I was at one recently where everyone only did foreign language Bardic, which made me super excited. I was super happy about that. Where people only did foreign language Bardic, and I thought that was great. And then I went to another one where it was almost exclusively Filk, and I had fun with that too because I like Filk because I am a man of moderation and extremes in that I moderately live between the extremes. So yeah, but it's been a lot of fun. It's also been kind of cool because my fiance and I are planning on moving to Europe after we finish our education stuff because he has family from there and he liked living there, and we just have a lot of personal reasons that's what he wants to do. And I told him I wouldn't move unless he gave me a ring, and then he called my bluff and proposed, and so I guess I'm moving to Europe in a few years. But
where in Europe are you thinking?
well, that's the thing is that we're still picking out based on where to do PhD programs, because both of us are doing our master's, so it's pretty much where we can get our PhDs done. His is a little easier to do in Europe, Well, actually, both of ours are pretty easier to do because I focus on music medicine, and that is like a big thing in like at least half of Europe. Focuses on medicine and music and alternative medication, and or like just regular medicine but with music too is pretty big. So of course I have places I want to like Austria would be a dream, but there's plenty of other countries I'd like to be in. And then he himself focuses on he does religious anthropology, and his big thing is death rituals. And lately he's been focusing more and more on neo-paganism because that is a thing that's becoming more emergent, especially in the SCA with like Asatru religions and what have you. So he does a lot of work there. And I mean, Asatruism is kind of like the new thing in neo-paganism. And so while it's very much tied to Scandinavia, there are other countries that are becoming more and more interested in it just because Vikings are always in vogue. So there's anywhere he can go either. So every time I've multiple times I've tuned into events at Drakenwald just to like kind of like touch base and like kind of suss the people out. And he started playing in Drakenwald, so there's sometimes every now and then I kind of like keep an ear to the ground, see if there's someone that he might know that's doing things. And it's always fun to kind of hear people make bids for their countries about like, oh, you should really come to Sweden. We have this event and it's one of the best events ever, and also we have socialized healthcare. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but like so does most of Europe. You're like, you're not.
I was gonna say because we lived in Drakenwald and we actually did a rain in Drakenwald.
Oh really?
Yeah, we can chat about it offline. But yeah, like and I was gonna say earlier, like the idea of even having a persona is something that is very alive and well in North America, but it's quite different in Drakenwald. There, you go to an event, it's like this could be a Lost Connect event or 14th century Spanish. So you have different outfits. You just wear the right outfit to the event. So it's much more fluid that way. You can kind of, in terms of having different things. And I kind of wonder if that's maybe I guess different systems appeal to different people. But,
I think that's an old time SCA thing too.
I kind of like it better because, but like I'm not sort of pigeonholed into one thing.
Yeah, I mean, Kushik has a certain period, but she wears clothes from other stuff.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
her friends give it to her, right?
I kind of agree with that. So my partner started playing in Drakenwald. His name is Carlos. It's actually Carlos the Fugitive because of a thing. Because when the crown gives you a weird nickname, that's your nickname now. That's what you get forever. So it's Carlos the Fugitive.
When did he play?
He started playing. Oh gosh, he's in the other room. I should ask him. I'll yell at him in a second.
Okay.
Let me make my point, and then I'll yell at him. But so his name is Carlos, and Carlos is, gosh, I hope I'm getting this right. I believe it's Greek for priest, or it's Arabic for priest. But essentially, Carlos was a term that a person who practiced a non-standard religion would be given. And it was a way that they identify themselves to others, that I am a safe person, you can talk to me about your non-standard religion. And it was a way to convey, so it was more of a title than a specific name. And that worked very well in Drakenwald because, as Her Grace was saying, there's no, people just kind of do whatever. They just kind of did whatever the event was, or so like he has like Mongolian garb, he has Arabic garb, he has standard Irish Celtic garb. He has just like a bunch of tea tunics. He has a bunch of random garb that he still has from then because he played in a bunch of places, and you just kind of dressed up for the event. And even then, like he told me, sometimes the events aren't like they're themed, but sometimes people don't even show up in the theme. They just, I felt like wearing this outfit, so this is the outfit I'm going to the event in. And so it's kind of interesting too because he also doesn't see his persona as like an identity. It's just the name he uses for SCA stuff, and his identity is whatever he's interested in, which is usually for him it's he teaches a lot of cannibalism and death ritual classes, as well as a bunch of cute monster classes for kids. This is other thing.
I'm going to predict that you two are going to go over really well in Drakenwald.
Oh, I think so already. We have a few people that are. I know for a fact at least 2 people are actively like vying for us to go to certain place, and it also helps that like not to toot my own horn, but like New World stuff is so much more interesting over there because nobody does it.
I
So
was
there's
thinking of saying that, but I didn't want to play into like the novelty.
oh yeah, no,
I was like, oh, I don't want to say that.
this is one of those cases where like I'm fully aware that
Okay,
that's
good.
like
Yeah.
no. There are a few people that like I performed I mean, because you know they do Bardic in every language because it's Drachenwald, and so I was performing a New World piece once with them, and like the one of the people that was there was like, oh my god, that's amazing, you have to come teach about this class, I think it'd be more interesting. Like I like, and they were like actively petitioning me, they're like, I think you're going to be so much better received here and you can leave the dirty nasty US because of course we have those pejorative opinions about us in Europe. But they're like going on about, yeah, like why are you still there, you could just be here. And I'm like, we're in a pandemic, I can't leave if I wanted to, but I appreciate the thought. No, we are part of we are pretty excited about that stuff, and I think that'll help with the tradition too, because I've never lived abroad, so I'm, you know, there is that worry about some culture shock and experience shock and what have you, but I think it's nice to have some things that can ground you, and you know the SCA is global, so it's nice to have some of those people that actually at least have a similar interest of anything else that you do. I think I'm just, the part I'm most nervous about is having people like be really hard on me about my diction in foreign languages. I think that's going to be the fun one, is having someone going to be like, that's not proper German, or that's not proper French. French is my worst one. So, but let me ask. I'm not leaving. I'm just gonna go ask him real quick when he started playing Drachenwald. Give me 1 second.
Oh my goodness, this is amazing. So much information.
The font of knowledge.
But you consider it is getting close to 11:30 his time.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
That's one thing I wanted to circle back with was Savia made the point about songs being hereditary to the Wet'suwet'en. And then I was thinking about there are arts that are also hereditary. Like there's certain nations where if you weave, like you have permission, and then that's a hereditary permission. That if you were in the SCA and you wanted to do that thing, it would just be especially hard to do. Right?
Mm-hmm. What he was saying about the native speakers of Nawa, that's more speakers than there are speakers of Manx Gaelic. Probably by an order of a magnitude of 10, at least, if not 100.
Yeah, anytime anyone wants to tell me that classical Nahuatl's a dead language, I'm like, it's more alive than Latin or Old English. And yet people want to sing those.
Wait, I thought Gaelic was still used, or that's known as Irish, right?
Well, there are different dialects. Different dialects.
It's interesting because in Scotland, kind of the first, like how the residential schools were rolled out in Canada, that came from Scotland. So there was schools. So this is, you know, sort of my background is, and they were beaten for speaking Gaelic. So they were beaten and they couldn't speak Gaelic. They had to learn English. And then they came here and they were like, well, that's how the ruling class works, is the ruling class creates schools and beats out native languages to civilize them. And so that's like, so they're like, Gaelic is, I mean, there is Irish, but it's also in Scotland, and it's also seen as that's kind of a part of our history that's been robbed.
And then you get into the regional dialects of Gaelic.
Yeah,
or Gaelic.
It's not just in Ireland, is my point.
Yeah, and even then, like, you know, we don't always think about the fact that countries are nice and uniform now, but they were not always uniform, and they were not always nice, and you know. Yeah, there's a lot of
when you dig in.
Yeah, especially there. I have a friend who specifically does a Highlander persona. So she's part Scottish and she does a Highlander persona. Mm-hmm. And she will be happy to tell you how she's a Highlander and not a Scot, and go on about the differences there, and will very proudly tell you the specificities and how she hunts the Scotsmen for breakfast, basically. Yeah. So
I shared a TikTok video to Kiva, And it was like 4 or 5 different First Nations that are all neighboring. And one of them was like, you want to fight? You looking for a fight? And the other ones were like, no. And then finally one of them was like, yeah, sure, I'll throw down. And they went at it. But like, just talking about how there's differences. This is like, they are all Coast Salish First Nations, but they are all also very, very different. And one of them in particular used to like to fight historically with the other.
Well, people like, so I live on I'm not First Nations, but I live on a reserve, and people here in Musqueam are still mad that Haida came down sort of between 1830s and 1850s and took people and took them away. And and they're still like, they'll still gripe about it. It's very real. Like the differences and the fact, like where I am is the mouth is the estuary of the Fraser River, which is a very esteemed position. It still is in terms of fishing, and it's where the defense, when the Haida would come, like for slaves and other things, they would come and they were like, Musqueam would fight them off. Like they kind of play nice, but sometimes it's not so nice. So it's like very real.
My grandfather. So I'm in Teuctli, and my husband is Cree from northern Alberta. So when I told my grandfather that I was dating him, he asked me, first of all, where's he from? Just to make sure we're not related. And I told him, I said, well, he's Cree from northern Alberta. And he laughed. And he just looked at me and said, what's so funny about him being Cree? And he was just like, those Cree men are still coming here and stealing our women, only we don't have horses for them to take with them. I was like, oh. Because there's a long history of Cree people passing the mountain pass, going through the mountains, coming here, taking First Nations women to marry them, and horses, and then fucking back.
So, my partner is he's a very fun mix. I tell him that he's the most New York ever, because he is literally half Italian, half Jewish, and I mean like directly from those places. Like his Jewish family, they like fled to Wales during World War II to escape all of everything going on, and then ended up leaving there. They fled to Wales to leave some of the stuff in Ireland, in Israel, and then they ended up leaving Wales during World War II because of all the stuff going on there, and going on in Europe. And then his family from Italy is like his mom is trying to move back to the motherland because she's older and wealthy and doesn't have kids to deal with, so she just wants to buy a cottage in the countryside and make bread and argue about the virtues of holistic eating to Italians that are not going to listen to her, but it's in her blood, so she's going to do it. Anyways, so he has this very interesting background. When I first met his mother, because his mother was the first one, his first family member I met. So I first met his mother, and we had this great lunch. We were talking and everything. As soon as I left to go back to work, his mother turned to him and said, "Are you sure he's not Jewish? Like, are you sure? Because he looks exactly like your cousins from Israel. Like exactly, just like not like even the same shape. Like he looks. Are you sure he's not Jewish?" And every time I go to New York to go visit his family, because that's where they're living in now, I will have people come up to me and start speaking Hebrew, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't speak the language. Yo no sé cómo hablar el lenguaje. I don't know anything about Hebrew, and like I have multiple people that come up to me, and multiple members of his family. His grandmother, who's Jewish, she's asked me, she's like, so are you Ashkenazi? Are you Sephardic? And I'm like, I'm not technically. I'm
Mexican.
I'm Mexican. But like, if you say that, I mean, there's a really good chance that you might be Sephardic if you're Mexican because of the diaspora that left during the Inquisition. So like, there is also a distinct chance that I might possibly be Jewish. So like, I have to like think about that now. That's something that like we have, because we're still figuring out all our genealogy stuff going on, but like there's a very distinct chance that we are probably at least part Jewish somewhere in our family line. And especially because there's a thing going on in Spain for a while where if you could prove that your family fled Spain during the Inquisition because of their heritage for being Jewish, you could actually qualify for Spanish citizenship. And so that's a thing. That news came out the year after my grandmother died, who would have been the one that was the keeper of that knowledge. And so there's just a huge question mark over my whole family where we're like, so like, are we or are we not? Because we know, like, because grandma knew where we were from in Spain, but like no one else does now that she's gone, and the rest of the family isn't talking. So like, like, what's going on? Like, were we not?
Would you call this unexpected information?
Yeah.
Because it's managing possession. Okay, sorry.
It's true. I did not expect that. Nobody does. Nobody ever does.
Oh, I get it.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I understand like the possibly not dating your cousin thing. That's a very common thing where my family is from, where there are two major families I'm from what's a border region of Mexico and Texas. Mm-hmm. And I mean like an active border region where people like actively cross back and forth for school and work every day and what have you. And there are two major families there that have most of the positions of power. And almost everyone is related to one of them in some form or fashion. And sometimes people are related to both. Mm-hmm. How does that happen, huh?
I have an uncle who is also my mom's cousin on both sides of the family. Figure that one out. I'm like, oh gosh. But we have to, for my family.
Oh, your Grace, I was meant to say, I asked him where I asked my partner where he was playing. So he said that he was in Prague for a while. When he was playing specifically in the Dresden area around 2009, 2010 is when he started. So that is the information I have on that. Don't know if you have any serendipitous connections to that, but
it's the right time period, isn't it?
Gosh, that's.
Or were you there earlier?
Are you asking me? Sorry.
Yeah, we were asking you.
Sorry, I got you. When was I in Drachenwald? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. 2009, 2010 era?
Yeah, the rain was in 2010.
So he might have.
It was a weird rain because we technically lived in South Africa, but in Drachenwald you have to qualify to fight in Crown, which is very. They made it hard because a big portion of Drachenwald is in Germany with the American army base, and so people would come in, win Crown, and then rotate back to the States. So they made it so you have to live in Drachenwald for a year. You have to go to a certain number of events in a certain number of countries. So what we ended up doing is we had qualified, and then during the rain is we would take a week off work, and then we would fly up and do, let's say, an event in Sweden, and then take a week to go to Denmark, and then do a second event, and then fly back. So we ended up, and then he was working for a Finnish company, so we spent a lot of time in Finland. And there's a fabulous event, a week-long event just outside of Finland in the summertime, which is like a really hardcore period event on the shore of a lake. And
is that the one that's the Battle of the Bread, where it's the whole bread?
No, that's in Sweden. That's
okay.
The Swedish event. Double Wars. Yeah, they have like argue about which side to butter the bread on. Yeah, that's a whole thing.
Yeah, I heard that was a really big thing. Someone performed a bardic piece specifically about that because of how big of a thing it is. That there's apparently multiple bardic pieces about the bread. For those of you who are just wondering what we're talking about, so apparently in Sweden there's a bread that has like bubbles and holes on one side, and there's like an argument over, do you butter the side with the holes or do you butter the flat side that doesn't have holes? I don't know why it's an argument. Clearly you butter the side with the holes, but apparently
that way you get more butter.
Yeah. But apparently people don't agree and have very strong opinions about it otherwise. So some people are wrong, and so they have this war about it.
Uneven butter sounds terrible, by the way. I'll fight you, Esteban. I'll fight you.
There's one very cool thing that Double Wars does every year is that they alternate. You pay into a fund. I don't know how exactly it works. And they fly out from anywhere in the world an A&S person, from like a well-known A&S person from a different kingdom. And then the next year it's a fighting person. And so they alternate fighting with A&S. they get the person in, they cover their flight, they cover their site fee, their food, and then they get them to teach all weekend. So they had a Duke from Montier flew out, Duke Davin. Yeah, so I think so it would be cool to see that in other places too, like sort of this cross pollination happening.
Yeah,
that's another thing too. Is, you know, as you were saying when you arrived, one of the things we want to hear about the neat things that are happening, and as people are passing, we're losing some of our oral history. So you know, we were talking about that last week. It'd be nice to get some of that history down before we lose more people.
I mean, absolutely. You know, clearly this was a little bit more of a SCA related duty of me being there as the Kingdom Bard to witness everyone telling tales of our first king. But at the same time, it's something that I think about personally. I mean, there's a lot of stories that my grandmother shared with me and my mother and other family members that I really wish she had said more of. I really wish that we had really pressed her for more of that, because there are some indigenous things that she told us about that I'm pretty sure aren't going to be written down anywhere else. There are some legends and stories that I've heard about that I've tried to find references to. One of the most personal ones was she had this dish she would make. So there's a dish in Mexico. In most places that speak Spanish have a dish called asada de puerco. So asada de puerco, usually interpreted as like a grilled pork dish. Different places make it different ways. In certain parts of Mexico, it's common to make it kind of like a stew. Usually you would make it as like a roast of some sort, but in certain parts of Mexico, it's common to either like roast like a whole rump and then chop it up and then make it into like a stew afterwards, or just flat out make it in the stew beforehand. My grandmother's was the best, of course, because it's, you know, your family always makes it the best. But this time I'm not lying. It really was the best, and it was very special and specific. And I never had anyone else make it nearly as close as she did. And other people would have it, and they would talk about how it's the best asada de puerco they've had, and you know, it's so great and amazing. And as a kid, I was like, oh yeah, you know, it's just because grandma's the best cook ever. And as I got older, and I love cooking, I have a passion for cooking. I can outcook my Italian partner. That's how good of a cook I am. So I love cooking, and I was watching her make things because, of course, she's not going to tell me. And those of you who have any kind of immigrant grandparent know that they're not going to write down the recipe. They're just going to, you know, you have to observe them, and you have to make sure that you have that specific cup that is the exact size for the measurement of whatever flour or sugar it is. They're not going to tell you how many millimeters or cups that is. No, you just have to have that cup. I hope you have that cup in your household, because you'll never be able to replicate the recipe otherwise.
Or you add it until it looks like this.
Yeah. So I was just watching her do that thing, and I'm watching her go on and on with it. And I noticed she's putting orange. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you know, I've never seen people put orange peel, but orange and citrus is not unusual. That's really common. There's a lot of recipes that have orange and citrus, but I noticed she's putting orange and bay leaf and a few other things, and I'm like, this is very interesting. A lot of the recipes I've seen don't use these ingredients. And then she passed away, and she had someone that was like a home health provider that was helping out with my grandfather, who was coming in. And she tried to make the recipe, and it just felt flat, like it wasn't the same. And I was looking at it, and I'm like, there's something wrong. Like, she's not putting in those things. And so I started doing more research. It turns out my grandmother wasn't making asada de puerco. She was making cochinita pibil, which is a traditional Mayan dish, which is Mayan pork. It's a suckling pig that's traditionally made with bitter orange and bay leaf and a bunch of other spices wrapped in a banana leaf, put in what's called a pibil, which is the Mayan word for an oven that is basically in the ground and slow cooked that way and what have you. So this whole time she was using the ingredients and the various spices and what have you from that Mayan recipe and just modifying them to be close to the Mexican approximate that would have been more popular, which would have been the asada de puerco. And that was one of the most mind-blowing things ever. And I remember like finding it out and telling my mother, and my mother just being like, "Oh my God, you're right!" Like, and like we went through it together, and like I'm like, "What do you remember, Mom? What do I remember? Let's go back and forth." And we're like, "Yeah, she used that, she used that, she used that," and that's how we figured out that recipe. And now I have a partner that can't eat meat, so I don't make it very much. I do make it. I do get to make it for special occasions because I have enough
Potlucks.
friends. Yeah, for potlucks or for my best friend. It's one of her favorite dishes that I make. So for her birthday, I'll always make it. And I don't like turkey. I think turkey's overrated. I've had some good turkey, but I think overall it's really overrated. So for not great Thanksgiving holiday that I don't really care about anyways to begin with, I use it as an excuse to just cook because I like cooking and making food. I'll make cochin de pibil. So I'll make I'll make pork instead of turkey, and everyone loves it and thinks it's great. And I'm glad that I'm breaking that tradition of turkey for some reason that was popular. But yeah, so there's some, you know, there's something to be said about losing tradition when people pass away. And it's something that like I personally struggle with, like how am I gonna fix that, and what am I gonna do moving forward? I talked to my partner about that, and you know he's very adamant. He's like, I want you to teach our kids Nawa, and I'm like, yeah, but like, Papito, I didn't speak it natively as a kid, and he goes, yeah, but you know, we need to keep those traditions alive. And it's not like you don't, like it didn't influence your language, because those of you who know anything about Spanish, Spanish dialects are heavily influenced by whatever indigenous culture is speaking them. So like that's why, you know, Spanish is like the third most common language, but has the biggest number of dialects or like distinct vocabulary differences as far as major languages goes, because every country basically has their own word for a different thing, and it often comes specifically from whatever indigenous culture was there. And so a lot of words in Spanish that I would use for certain things, I get them because they're from Nahuatl. Zacate is the word we use for grass, which comes from sacat, which is the word for grass in Nahuatl. Comal is like the word for a frying pan. It's also a Nahuatl word. It comes from a Nahuatl description. There's a lot of words that we use colloquially in Mexican Spanish that directly come from Nahuatl. Cacahuate is one. Cacahuate usually means peanuts. Cacahuat, it was the word for chocolate, for the cocoa bean. Overall, so there's a lot of words that come from Nahuatl. So I think it's, you know, it's worth, I guess it's worth learning in the sense of like, oh, okay, like, you know, those really like bougie like East Coast parents that want to teach their kids like proper Latin and Old English to get more in touch with whatever like historical classical literature they want them to pursue. But at the same time, like there is something to be said about that, and I think it is worth exploring. But yeah, it's tragic. It's tragic, the loss of culture. It's so tragic and heartbreaking.
It's very sad,
that.
really.
It's terribly sad. For me, that hits home really closely because both my grandparents went to residential school. I think my headphones died.
We could still hear you. I think she could.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure.
Okay.
They did a noise and then I couldn't hear anything. Where I'm seeing that a lot with my grandmother. Like I asked her, I said, well, what's the word that we have for great grandparents? Because I have great grandparents. And she said, I don't know what it is. And she's like, I'm sure there is a word, but I just don't know what it is because
We've
no.
just
Now
lost
we
your
lost you.
mic.
Uh-oh.
Hello?
Hi.
There we go.
There we go.
she just didn't know words because she didn't use it, or she had forgotten already, and she's not the oldest sister, so she went to that school for one of the longer periods of time out of all of her siblings, right? So there's just stuff that she doesn't remember anymore. That it's kind of, well, it's just sad because you're like, oh, okay, what are you gonna do about it, right?
Yeah, and along with that, we don't talk about this, but there's so many people within our own cultural communities that don't want to remember and preserve these things.
Yeah.
It's It's unfortunate, but they're my grandfather too. My grandfather also wanted us to not be as indigenous as possible. He wanted to make sure that we were mejorando la raíz, as the expression goes. My father too. My father didn't want us speaking Spanish because he didn't want us to grow up with an accent.
Yeah.
That was his big thing. Was he didn't want us growing up with accents because he didn't want us to have to suffer that, because he saw his own family deal with that. So he didn't want us to have that. And he grew up around the U.S. further up north. He spent most of his time in Utah, and he didn't like being a minority in Utah, so he didn't want us to have the same disadvantages he had. So we didn't learn Spanish for that reason from him, which was very hard because we had family that only spoke Spanish. So we did what every other like bilingual family does, which is half the people are speaking one language, half the people are speaking the other language. Everyone understands each other somehow. We don't know how, but we're all understanding each other, even though none of us are speaking the same language. But yeah, it's that's an unfortunate thing that we honestly don't talk about, because it's kind of it's kind of a little bit shameful in some ways, and it's also a little depressing. But there are people within our communities that don't want to preserve the culture.
Yes. I had that happen in my family. My grandfather's mother was at least a quarter First Nations, if not Métis. And we didn't know that. We were never taught that. They never spoke of it. He never spoke of it. He never acknowledged it.
We see that a lot. I see that a lot.
And so, we've always felt an affinity for it. My uncle became a linguist in First Nations languages. And he didn't know about it, but obviously the culture was speaking to him, right? And then about 3 or 4 years ago, we found out, we went looking for it, because everybody looked at Randy and said, "Oh, you're so Indian." Right? There's no way that you're not First Nations. And we did find the link, but not where we thought it might be. We thought it might be on the paternal side of my grandfather, and it's on his mother's side. It could be on the other side as well. We don't know. But I feel like I now know that there's a hole that I was never allowed to learn, never allowed to feel. So that's
my sister and I talk about that a lot, especially since my grandfather, not that he doesn't share pieces of information, but he just refuses to speak the language and stuff like that. And so my sister and I and all of our siblings were all given traditional names at birth, and they were given to us through a traditional way. So all of our great grandparents got together to give us our names. They chose the name specifically with an intention of who that person was that had the name, and then they gave them to us. And so my legal name is Teuctli, and that was my great grandmother's name, and it means fresh water. And my sister has her name as well, and so do all of our siblings. And my grandfather argued vehemently to not give us traditional names. And for him, it was a safety issue. He didn't want us to have to grow up with the discrimination of being Indigenous that he grew up with. And so it was very much a safety thing. This is the safest bet, is to go with English names. They'll face less hardships and less discrimination if they don't sound Native. Now he's come around to it, and some of our siblings have names from his side of the family, and he's become much more open with it. But I've seen that with other people as well, where there is a family member that just, the buck stopped with them and they said, no, this is a safety thing. But you see that in the opposite way as well. At least for me, I've also been advised by my grandfather to make sure that my partner was Native, because that was important for whatever reason, but not giving us Indigenous names was also important. So it's kind of a fractured ideology of what is the safest option for you. Do you fully embrace your culture? Do you not fully embrace your culture? What's going to provide the safest environment for my kids or my grandkids, right?
I know when at my mother's funeral, Randy was asked to do the territorial acknowledgement, and he did it in Squamish, on Squamish land, which just, it resonated really nicely for us who knew.
Wow. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, there's
The Squamish language, huh?
There are lots of First Nations languages up here. Depends on where you're living. There are probably 5 or 6 in the area covered by Lionsgate.
In BC, there's I think close to 100 languages.
Yeah.
And I think only 4 or 5 of them come from the same language family, and those are the ones in Shuswap area, and all of them are completely different except for those 4 or 5.
Oh, language families. That's a fun rabbit hole to go down. I mean, just with like Nahuatl. So that's my as far as what we consider New World languages go. Nahuatl's the one I have the most knowledge of. Like the language family is insane, and the different branches it has, and the way it's we don't think about cultures pre-contact. By being contact with Europe, so we don't think about cultures pre-contact being very very spread out. We think that everyone kind of stayed isolated, and that's just not really true. Like there's evidence of active trade routes going from the top of North America all the way to the bottom of South America. There was very much was open active trade and communication, and you can see that with language families where Nahuatl, classical Nahuatl, there are so many cultures in the Mexico Aztec region that don't speak Nahuatl remotely, and then you have First Nation and like North American indigenous groups that do have Nahuatl family roots, and you're like, okay, so this language somehow got all the way to like Montana, but like ignored like all the land in between. How does it do that? Yeah, there's some really interesting and fascinating rabbit holes when it comes to language. Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff there.
The relationship between Finnish and Hungarian, or Magyar rather.
Can I as moderator leave you guys to not swear at each other for 5 minutes or so? I need to get some food. So
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I realize that we're just.
I trust you all.
Refrain.
You're just letting me talk for so long, and I'm just going on and on. Yeah, it's like almost midnight over here, and I'm like, oh wow.
It's almost 1 a.m. for me.
Okay, let's leave it, actually. Does anybody know what time it is?
It is almost, it's 9:55.
Yep.
So on stereo time, it's almost midnight.
Standard.
Yeah. On stereo time, it's midnight.
Thank you on stereo. That's what I meant. Sorry.
On stereo, that's midnight. Yeah.
Yeah, we're close to midnight.
And
And in Atlantia, close to 1 a.m.
Cheese and Pete.
I'm on a medical recovery / grad school schedule, which means I have no set time for anything, and it's just whatever my body or my schedule or my classes determine in the moment. So like I have days where I need to be in bed by like 8, and then I have days where like I'm up until like 3 or 4, and I'm like, oh, I don't have anything tomorrow at all. So I have.
Tell me that.
Yeah, I have a weirdly flexible schedule right now. But yeah, like I said, I can talk about these things. I appreciate you all letting me just ramble, because I can.
It's great, enjoyable.
Yeah, because I can talk this stuff forever, and I'm really glad that there are so many other people here. I'm not gonna lie, when I got asked to do this presentation, I was a little worried that I was like, oh, I'm gonna be here speaking on behalf of an entire group of people, and there's going to be no one else there to chime in. But I'm really excited that, at least from the impression I'm getting, that I was able to initiate a conversation between people from different backgrounds that have these indigenous ties, and to be able to communicate about their own thoughts and needs, because that's honestly the most important part. Like I said, it's impossible for me to be a representative of so many people, especially when I have barely anything other than a landmass related to those people. But I'm really glad. I really would feel as if I was successful if I at least advocated for a place on the table for all of us, and for all of us being able to have voices in this matter. And I'm very thankful that you all chimed in and have your opinions and you're sharing your experiences. I think that's fantastic, and it's great. I love it so much. Mission
That's really
accomplished.
awesome. I absolutely love the fact that there's a space to talk about these things, and from a more indigenous perspective and a New World perspective in the SCA, especially like relating to the SCA, because I like talking about indigenous in general, but it's really nice to have it relate to the SCA, and it just brings, I think, a lot of things to the forefront that need to come to the forefront, you know, stuff that needs to be talked about, and it's nice to have that.
I agree.
I agree.
I really appreciate this conversation happening around indigenous languages and cultures, because I could have a conversation about this sort of thing related to Donegal versus Ulster Irish around a campfire at any SCA event, but having indigenous languages in on the conversation, actively participating. I mean, I love to hear about indigenous TikTok where, you know, we're making jokes about who fights with whom, because I mean, my grandparents fight about, you know, who's the most Norwegian and therefore deserves such and such, but I don't get those experiences with non-European backgrounds. So I really appreciate that.
I think too, to help people who want to have, you know, New World personas and personas that help them connect with their cultural background, it's important to understand and have a greater understanding of the fact that there are so many indigenous cultures that have so many different relationships to each other. Just like European cultures, who'd have thunk it? Like, oh my gosh, we had our own trade routes, we had our own populations and civilizations, we had our own laws and customs and things like that. And I think people understanding that in the SCA will help others who want to have an indigenous persona, because it becomes less, what's the term? I hear the term a lot, like pan-Indian culture, where it's, you know, we're all kind of put under one umbrella. All of the indigenous cultures are put under one
And
umbrella.
they're very different values.
It's like, yeah, they're all, a lot of them are very, very different. And I love, you know, I think that helps people.
It's another one of those slippery slope things. My husband works at Teuctli Healing Village, which is essentially a minimum security federal prison where the residents are following the red path and reconnecting with their culture as a way of dealing with the traumas that have existed in their past that might have led to them being where they are, and helping them once they leave is like, you know, getting them to a point where they can leave. But it does tend to be, because there's a lot of Cree, there's a lot of Blackfoot. There's a lot of, you know, everybody in in the BC, maybe some from Alberta as well. And they're trying to do something that will work for all of them. And so you do get what, you know, that the pan-Indian, I know that's one of the things my uncle talks about is, you know, he's really not keen on pan-Indianism because he feels that the cultures are too distinct.
I feel that being Hispanic, being Latino, there's like a Pan-American ideology that every Latino culture is the same, and we're not. Even within the same like scope, like so Mexican, because that is what I am tied to. Even being Mexican, like we are not all the same form of Mexican. Like that's not. There's so many different identities there, and so many different things that take place and what have you, in different ways that we relate. I used to work in immigration with kids, and it was always so fascinating to me to see the different backgrounds that they came from, and the way they learned how to relate to one another, despite those different backgrounds. Because you have to remember that pretty much every American country has had a problematic relationship with its indigenous people, and Latin American countries are no different. And so it was really fascinating to see like these kids who, for being honest, probably grew up in situations where they were told to hate each other, and to see them bond. It was very, very heartwarming, and probably one of my favorite things about that job. It was a rough job. Immigration is not an easy thing to work in, especially at the time I was working in. It was a rough time. But you know, I wanted to kind of touch on what Sabe was saying about how, you know, she likes talking about culture as far as indigenous culture in the SCA and is really excited about that, but wasn't always excited about that outside of the SCA. I can feel that. I can feel that because I don't like talking about being Hispanic outside of the SCA, or I don't like having to like justify being Hispanic or what have you. Outside of the SCA, it's not my favorite thing. I feel like whenever I bring up the fact that I'm Latino outside of the SCA, it's usually in a negative context, or I have to defend a point of view, or have to argue like a social justice point or what have you. And that's not to say we're not, because we were literally doing that today in this whole conversation and what have you. But at the same time, you know, talking about it in the SCA is different. There's a different context because I feel like, for the most part, most of the people here are more interested in working towards a solution.
That will likely be Fiona. Stuff is ready for her.
So people seem to be more interested in working towards a solution together, or being at least more interested. And because the SCA is so focused on gaining knowledge of other people's cultures, people tend to take more of an interest in the personal aspects of the culture and not just defending, you know, why do you people do this? Why do you people do that? You know, that's so different. Why do you do this? Oftentimes when I ask those questions in the SCA, it's something along the lines of like, oh, that's interesting. Why did you all weave that way? Was it because of the animals in the area, or is it because of this or because of that? And it just kind of leads into a more conducive conversation, honestly, where I feel like I can relate to people more for being different, having these conversations in the SCA than outside of it.
It will be on the desk if I'm not here.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's weird. It's weird how you know, sometimes you just really get so worked up about some SCA stuff, and then other times you're like, oh, I love this. This is great. I love this avenue. This is fantastic. I never want to leave this behind. It really is the most functional dysfunctional family. Some people put it. So.
I agree with that. I'm gonna have to take off though.
I am too. It is past midnight. I really should get some rest.
To sleep.
I do have to work at 8:15 tomorrow morning.
Oh,
dang. If the commute's only 10 feet.
Hey, Kushag, thank you.
For all you stragglers, thank you so much for sticking around. I loved having these conversations. Please feel free to look up. I have a persona Facebook, so it's under. You just put Tenoch, you'll probably come up. Feel free to look me up. Keep me in mind if y'all ever want to talk, do events in the future. Just feel free to reach out to me. I don't mind being a resource for anything. I had a fantastic time. Thank you for letting me talk for hours beyond what I was supposed to. Thank you for being patient with me switching gears at the beginning.
So
the rough start.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this and helping us and teaching us. Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Honestly, it was a fantastic time. I'd be happy to do it again. Thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone who came out and stuck into the bitter end. And there'll be another one next week, by the way.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. That's Nerdways.
Oh, yes.
I'm looking forward to the Aztec drumming class.
Well, we'd have to, if it's going online, then we'd have to schedule that one in April at this point. But we are booked up with something every week, literally every week, including December 27th from now until April.
Tenoch, Nerdway is doing something on his Mongol culture next week.
Oh, that's fascinating. I definitely gotta come by and see more of these because this was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to see what else everyone else is doing.
Hey, Kushag, it's maybe a stupid question, but did Mongol culture ever involve any music or anything? Because I love.
Yes, it does. It does involve music. It is not a form of music I do, but they have an incredibly interesting form of throat singing that is awesome to hear. So what I would suggest is Google Mongolian music and see what you can come up with on YouTube, because there's some really cool groups out there that are doing Mongol music.
There is
One of my daughters does Mongol.
myself.
There's a couple in Ontario that does a lot of music. They usually go by the Grouchy Mongol and the Perturbed Persian.
Are they out of Thornwold?
No, Stromgard. But
okay.
They're on Facebook. They've got the last name Olson, and you'll find them on the local groups. I know that you've been in the Dragon's Mist Bardic, so they run in the same circles. So if you want to ask them about Mongolian music, they could probably point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I know that there is a group that Dana likes to listen to. Oh gosh, I almost had the name of it. That's an actual Mongolian group, and you know, if you want to make her happy, you put that on and let her run with it.
Was it the Mongolian metal group?
No, it's and again, the name is it's a 3-syllable name, and they're fairly similar. Endornim Kwe or something like that. Anyhow, it's but they do some of the throat singing, and which is funny because also our Inuit do throat singing as well.
Ooh,
and it's
neat.
And it's well, I don't know if there's been any cross-pollination. You never can tell, you know, where people traveled from and through to get to places. But I know the Inuit do it competitively, whereas I think the Mongol are more collaborative. So, but it's a really interesting form of music. And it just, yeah. Look, like I said, I've been spending a lot of time over the pandemic. When I'm working at home, I often will have YouTube up, listening to, you know, 13th century cantigas de Santa Maria myself, because that's where what music I'm focusing on right now. But yeah, you can find a lot of stuff to sort of get yourself into that mindset. And one of my music teachers used to call it wallpapering yourself with the music of a time period, just to sort of get yourself into that groove, and then sort of going from there, where it becomes sort of, okay, yeah, that's that one. I feel this now. And, you know, and then if it's move on to the next one, or, well, how did that change from this time period to that time period? What's the differences?
Mm-hmm.
You know, play this one, then play that one, and sort of, you know, get yourself sort of thinking about it. But it's a good place to start, especially for, you know, in my day, it was recordings. That was before the internet.
Aban, is that enough to get you started?
You know, that'd be pretty good. Thanks.
So yeah, YouTube Mongolian music.
I was wondering, for Ottoman Turkish, anyone ever Ottoman Turkish? Because I'd love to try that as a persona.
And you can Google that. You know, basically, you know, look, YouTube will let you select quite a few things and sort of narrow things down. Even if you find one or two things, often they'll have a mix. And you can sort of click on that, and it switches tack on you and digs you deeper into a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube's really great for any kind of music you might care to listen to.
And that same couple does specifically Persian music, but they venture out into all sorts of things, including Ottoman Turkish.
Yeah. Again, I've focused mainly on European, mainstream European, with working with Collegium, but we are working everything from Gregorian chant up to Italian madrigals, and that's quite broad enough without throwing in some. You know, we sometimes do get into a little, say, the Crusader kingdoms, and some of the music there, or some Ladismo. Ladino stuff, or Sephardic from the diaspora, because again, it still fits in that sort of Western European balloon, so to speak. And I can tell you that we've been going now, well, since March of 1983, and we have not touched everything there is to touch. There's so, you know, if anything, all we've learned is that there's so much more to learn, even in within the limits that we've set ourselves. So, like
so
I
if
said,
you have the time, type in the search terms in YouTube and then just let the playlist run, and you will find like way more than you ever knew existed.
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
It's great. I love it.
So, hey, Kushag,
Mhm.
what percussion do you play?
I did percussion in school. So I did all keyboard percussion. I did, you know, so bells, timp. I did timp.
Cool.
I've done snare. I've done bass drum. I've everything.
Do you still doing them part of the SCA or not?
No, because that sort of music isn't part of the SCA.
What,
I'll play
percussion?
tabor and zills, occasional tambourine, jingle bells sort of thing, you know, bells on a strap sort of thing. I'm mostly a vocalist. I'm a vocalist and I play recorders. Percussion is the least of my instruments.
I do that as part of my dance band, the percussion stuff, and they allow that as a
Oh, yeah.
dance band. So
yeah,
I end up bringing my Rick and all that in my triangle and stuff, and it works quite well for those dances. I'm thinking about getting like a big old tabor, a big old medieval style drum, or a landsknecht, like a Renaissance style drum soon.
Yeah, I know one of our members, like I said, one of our members has nakers, which are the ancestors,
Ooh, I've been wanting to get
ancestors of the
those.
timpani, and another one has a dombeck. So
Ooh, I've been wanting to get those for years, the Doombeck and the Nakers.
yeah, nakers are basically a horseback instrument, which is sort of fun. So think timpani, only shrunk, so that you could wear them around your waist.
Oh, that's so cool.
Like marching 10 pounds.
Yeah, no, you don't have to. You know, I'm sorry, I've had to put the timpani away far too many times. You know, break up, wheel, you know, onto the wheels, pedal up, push them down the hall. Don't scrape the pedal. Those things, at the time I was pushing them around, weighed practically more than I did. No, nakers are a lot more manageable.
I hate to be a bit of a pain, folks, but
it's time for us to go home, isn't it?
It is time to go home.
No, we need to be cut off, and
yeah. Otherwise, if you got me started music, you know, sorry.
Get out of here. Get off my lawn.
Is it easy to email you?
I realize, of course, that you can just shut us down.
I wouldn't do that. No, I can tell you to get off my lawn, though.
Hey, Kushag.
Well, it looks like you're the one on your lawn, but good night.
Hey, Kushag. Is it easier to email you or Facebook?
Email, because I only go on, I don't go on Facebook that much. I find it too depressing. And I also find that the ads, it doesn't feed me where I want to be fed, if you know what I mean. So I only go on for special things. So email me. I've sent you my email. And that goes to my phone. I don't answer during working hours.
Hold on, let me check something.
So it's kushag@outlook.com.
Kushag E. Okay.
Kushag, and then E for Aaron, which is my mundane name.
Oh, all one word?
At outlook.com. That's me.
Oh, I got it. Thank you. I've been thinking about getting a pair of Nakers. Where'd he get the Nakers?
Nikolai got them. He kit built them. Ordered them out of England.
Ah, kit built from an early music shop, right?
Yeah, you better believe it, early music shop.
I didn't know it was possible. Is it easy or hard to do those? Because
you need to talk to Nikolai about that. He kit built a lot of our instruments.
Nice. How do I talk to Nikolai?
you email me, I'll pass your email on to him.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming, everybody. You have a great night now.
Good night, Sheree.
Sleep well.
Good night.
Night, Abang.
Good to meet you, Evan.